Thank you, and we're going to get back to the meeting now. If everyone could have a seat. We are going to move on to 6.8, item for 1:30 p.m., continued from January 10th, 2023 and January 24th, 2023. Consideration of a draft proclamation declaring Clear Lake Hitch emergency, and this is Supervisors Green and Crandall.
Thank you. Hi, thanks everyone for coming back. There is a long paper trail with this item, and so for those who have not tuned in previously, if you go on to the county website where agendas live, you'll see for this agenda item, there's a long list of documents that have been submitted, including some late entries. I encourage you all, if you haven't had a chance, go read that material. There's a lot of good background in there, lots of good ideas, some disagreement about other ideas, but if anyone is feeling out of the loop, or if anyone is feeling that our efforts so far together have not been fully transparent, I hope that today we can put those concerns to rest. We have done our absolute best in recent weeks to pull information from all these sources, to parse what these various efforts and committees and commissions have been up to in recent years, and we bring a lot of that information to you here today. We only have one item to talk about today, and that's the draft emergency proclamation. But if you want to see what all the other efforts and what all the other balls in the air have been up to now, there's no short of information on the agenda and all the attachments to the agenda. Also, I do want to mention that for those who were here January 24th, we almost spent 5 hours on the item then. We do have that posted on the county's YouTube channel. Should be on the Granicus as well. So again, all the material that was presented orally during those presentations, we are thankful for those who attended, and we incorporate all those presentations and all those comments in this continued hearing today on the proclamation. There's also a 2-page staff report. I'm just going to read 2 paragraphs out of it. While it is encouraging to see kind of this new focus being placed on the long-term recovery efforts of the Clear Lake Hitch or the CHI, it remains to be concerned. It is still concerning that no coordinated short-term plan exists for this all-important critical 2023 spawning season. And that's not a criticism, that's just an observation. Plenty of long-range planning has gone on to this before, and yet we still have a population level that is tanked. We are still faced here today as a board and as residents of this county about what do we do next. So it is reasonable to expect, regardless of what happens here today on this item, that in coming weeks and months and years, we will have several proposed actions, programs, funding requests, what have you, that will try to address what's happening here with the Clear Lake Hitch. We don't have the benefit of having those here today. We don't know what we're going to do on a lot of these items. We haven't identified buckets of money to apply to specific projects. So again, I ask for patience for those who say, what is the county going to do? A lot of what we're going to do today is say, we don't know yet. And you know, I appreciate that there's some concern that we've been at this several years, but we have not received the dramatic information we have until very recently. We are all learning this as we go. So one thing we are not going to be talking about today are a whole bunch of specific projects that probably do need to happen and will happen. We just need to figure that stuff out. And accordingly, the emergency proclamation that we are here to talk about today does not pretend to address, much less answer, many of the questions that have been raised regarding the specific roles and responsibilities of the County of Lake and the many departments, agencies, and commissions that the county oversees. Rather, the way it has been worded, it attempts to provide broad direction to our sister governmental agencies and other parties without necessarily committing them or the county itself to any specific plan, project, or course of action. Most, if not all, of the proposed board requests in the proclamation have been vetted in close consultation with agency representatives to ensure that they are reasonable, actionable, and limited in scope and purpose. Emergency proclamations can be useful tools to draw attention and funding to important issues. We have several of them standing on the books. This one is a little unusual in that it does have several requests that the board might make to our sister agencies, depending on the outcome of the discussion and debate here today. But whatever the outcome of that debate and this proclamation on the agenda today, we want to thank everyone who has contributed their ideas. We want to encourage them to continue to communicate, not just with the board, but with each other, to build bridges of understanding. Because with or without an emergency proclamation, it has become clear to me that there might be some distrust, there might be some divide, there might be some misunderstandings among our various communities, and we can't solve that with an emergency proclamation. We can only solve that with open hearts and open minds. And so I hope as we continue in this dialogue today that we will have those open hearts and minds, and then when we get close to a vote on the proclamation, it'll bear some resemblance to the will of the people here. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to, you covered most of it there, Supervisor Green. But I just want to emphasize that I would really like to get to a point of agreement today so we can get this proclamation for the Hitch completed, because it seems, and it's been stated that everybody, that's the main deal, everybody's fine with that. But there's a couple items that we all need to come to either agreement or disagreement, or agree to disagree, or something along those lines. But I really will just emphasize, let's do that in a constructive manner, and let's see what we can get done together. So appreciate everyone coming back, and be glad to see us move forward.
And I do want to mention, just for the benefit of people who don't understand the Brown Act because they don't use it on a daily basis like we do, but there have been multiple drafts that have been circulated over the past month, and we have not had the opportunity to speak as a board about it. For public transparency laws, we can only have these conversations in public with all of you. We cannot have these conversations without you present. 2 board members can discuss, so you have the 2 supervisors who brought the item, and the rest of us have not had a conversation. We have not had the opportunity to talk about it as a board, as a body, and that including all of the drafts that have been circulated. So I just wanted you all to know that because it occurred to me that maybe that's a piece the public doesn't quite understand. So how do you want to proceed?
Well, just a couple bullet points of explanation. So as Chair Pyska alluded, there have been a couple drafts floating around. We've been literally sending up trial balloons to see who likes what and to see if there was some consensus. And so there was a no asks draft that went out there that basically removed all the portions of the draft proclamation that requested anything of other agencies. Pulled that back because even that wasn't super popular. Some of the asks in here, the board requests seem to be fairly non-controversial and well supportable. There are some asks in there that at least a couple people have concerns with. I do want to clarify, in the first draft that went out on January 10th, there was at least an inkling in that draft proclamation that the board was taking a position on the emergency listing request with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That got pulled quickly because I don't think we would get consensus one way or another if we moved on that. There is some language still in one of the whereas statements in here that alludes to the fact that emergency listing request is pending. So just an explanation, and everything in here is totally editable. I used to be an editor, now I'm facing a room full of editors. But just for clarity, there is no formal position stated in the proclamation, as I understand it, or as I intended it in writing it, that would take a position on the emergency listing request. But there are several asks in there of our sister state and federal agencies that are specific in nature, and I think are meant to provide them some guidance and maybe even some assurance that they can count on the county as a partner. And if there are any questions on any specific items in the proclamation from the board, now might be a good time to do it, or we can just wait for public input. Thank you.
I'll just add one more thing. Blue Ribbon Committee did conduct a letter. There was some verbiage that was adjusted. So don't have it really on me. I could find it, but I know that there was a portion that used to say something along voluntary, but then now it's based on the science or something along those lines. Finding the science before making any changes, and so that letter was crafted differently before they agreed on it. The blue ribbon. Does it sound familiar? Anyone on the blue ribbon that was at the blue ribbon with me? Yes, and so Sarah concurs.
Somebody said yes.
Yes, thank you.
I guess I had a slightly different takeaway because the letter that was, the Blue Ribbon Commission letter that was attached to today's agenda item, my understanding is it was sent the way it was. My understanding is they were going to watch today's meeting and possibly make some amendments depending on our actions today. But my understanding is that the original draft of the letter was approved as it was, and that's what
I highlighted it too and read it. It says, critical agencies work quickly to determine where reductions in water usage are required based on the best available science. And it used to say something else like voluntary actions or something like that, but it was changed. So that was the only sentence, though.
Okay.
But just another thing to add, I know in this Blue Ribbon Committee, there also was projects and is projects that are currently still intact that revolve around the Hitch. I know that there's a couple that were approved last year for, I think it's Adobe Creek, I might be wrong. But I know there was a couple other proposed that probably didn't get passed yet, but I know the Tules are another aspect that would provided the Hitch as another, situation to keep. So not just the water quality, but the Hitch were also brought up to contribute to why we need to do the Thule Restore as well. So someone had mentioned the Blue Ribbon Committee having discussions about Hitch. Well, there is, and hopefully it continues on. And maybe if we can figure out something along the lines of having another committee in regards to the Blue Ribbon Committee, rather than creating a whole different one, because sometimes it seems like we create ad hocs and we just have so many. If we can address that maybe in the Blue Ribbon Committee and have that be another third ad hoc out of that committee, rather than us creating one and then kind of getting caught up with our staff and everything like that. But it's just a thought and an idea. But
Yeah, bouncing balls.
I know.
Totally appreciate that. Yeah, I think just for clarity, it may be helpful. I don't want to read all the bullet points, but just to explain why they landed there and what thought process went into it, it may be helpful. One, this all started, my own journey started in December when we had this emergency summit out at Big Valley Rancheria. Again, hugely thankful to all those agencies that pulled that together. It was in the form of an intergovernmental consultation, so it was not kind of the full-blown public airing we're having here today. But it was hugely important and significant for that to happen. In learning through that, so I believe what happened on the December meeting was a meeting of what's been called a Clear Lake Hitch Task Force, which has spun up on relatively short notice. There was a longer running committee or work group, I think Fred might have talked about it, involving the creation of something called a Clear Lake Hitch Strategy, which will be kind of a living document that could help the county and other partners here. So I'm just going to go blow by blow really quickly down the bullet points just in case there's any questions. First one is fairly standard, that we would declare an emergency here in Lake County, and we would ask the California governor to do the same. Next two bullet points are directed at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Basically, we want to be supportive of the process. There was a lawsuit and a settlement in April of last year that directed U.S. Fish and Wildlife to reopen its investigation of the status of the Clear Lake Hitch and whether it deserves to be placed on the endangered listing under the standard protocols of the Endangered Species Act. And that review process is ongoing, to my understanding, but it is expected to take up to 2 years to complete that new process. And of course, that raises questions about what do we do in the meantime. The second bullet point directs U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, among its other emergency actions, to prioritize and expedite completion of the draft Clear Lake Hitch Strategy, which I have only seen a rough draft of, but I guess they've been kicking that around for at least 3 or 4 years. It sounds like it's almost ready to present, and it would be presented to this board, and some of our sister agencies and our other stakeholders in this room will get some signatures on it, and that would provide a broad umbrella of potential future actions, both short-term and long-term. So the ask here is for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which has been acting as the lead agency on development of that strategy, to basically kick it into high gear. Let's get some signatures on it. Let's figure out some plans, and let's get on with it. There is an ask in there for the Blue Ribbon Committee for the Rehabilitation of Clear Lake to convene a meeting as soon as practical to talk about the Hitch, in specific threats to its 2023 spawning run. I'm a little bit new to the commission and its process. It's like most of our government agencies, really good at looking at the long-range future of the lake and what projects might be needed for that. It's going to be an important source of shepherding these various projects and actually getting them funded by the legislature or other state agencies. And it was pretty interesting, and they did submit a letter to this county in regards to this, and again, that's in the public record if you want to read it. There are 2 bullet points addressed to the State Water Resources Control Board, which does have some jurisdiction over not just water discharge, but also water supply issues all across the state, not just in Lake County. One of the bullet points is focused on potentially illegal activities, including illegal cannabis cultivation, and it does ask for ongoing enforcement of Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program and the Cannabis Cultivation Waste Discharge Regulatory Program to ensure that those laws are being enforced in a way that are protective of Clear Lake Hitch habitats. The second ask of the Water Board is a little more contentious. It does ask the Water Board to take regulatory steps, such as an information order or emergency regulations that may be necessary to assure viability of the Clear Lake Hitch upon receipt of stream-specific emergency flow recommendations. And as was mentioned here briefly, trying to calculate emergency flow recommendations is not an easy thing to do, much less apply them in a real-life situation in a very flashy, volatile watershed. But it's in there. There's an ask of the California Fish and Game Commission, which has chimed in not once but twice on this issue so far, or the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, to take reasonable steps to consider whether emergency regulations or amendments to sport fishing regulations may be needed to reduce predation of Clear Lake Hitch by carp and other non-native fish, to consider whether a hatchery or a refuge might be needed given the dire state of the chai population, to review and recommend short-term habitat improvement strategies, and for Fish and Game, when they do talk about these things, to actually come to the County of Lake so that we can participate in those discussions just as you are here today. And then lastly, there are 2 asks, for Bureau of Land Management and Mendocino National Forest. We do have, again, a whole lot of lands in this county that are in public ownership. They are in watersheds that do drain into Clear Lake. Their exact linkage to this, would be unknown, but when we're taking a look at the future of the lake, and it's in particular tributaries, it is helpful, I think, to take a watersheds-based approach. I think most agencies would agree that's the best way to take a look at this. So it just gives them a heads up that the hitch is a species of concern to this. There is going to be a state of emergency in the county, and we're letting our BLM and forest partners know about it. The last bullet point, this has been amended from the last version. There does seem to be some widespread support that one way or another, the county will develop and implement a plan this spring to manage flows from Adobe Creek or Highland Springs reservoirs to supplement some of the flows that are coming down those creeks to the extent feasible during the hitch spawning season, including but not limited to cold weather events during which groundwater pumping occurs for agricultural crop protection. And it also asks Water Resources to submit a mid-year budget request because they're probably going to be spending some money this year on projects they weren't exactly planning to do. So that's kind of the laundry list of things that the Board of Supervisors could request in this emergency proclamation. That said, it has been noted by multiple people, if we took all the requests out, we would still have a perfectly good emergency proclamation that would just say, hey, emergency, help us out. So that's kind of the long and short of the various requests in the draft proclamation. Again, I hope you all had a chance to read it. If you do have any specific questions about the purpose of an emergency proclamation in general, or the specific purpose for any of the asks that are in this draft, we'll take those questions during public comment.
Supervisor Spatier?
I think it's important. I think it's important that we have our conversation before public comment. That way they can provide public comment based on our feedback and our opinions, rather than waiting on theirs and then sharing ours and not them being able to speak on that again. I know I've been in the public before, and that's really annoying. I want to know what people are thinking so that I can speak on that. So I think we should have the conversation. We obviously need to do something. I'm saddened that there have been efforts for the last 8 years of being denied to try to do small projects, as far as whether those projects would have changed the outcomes of what we deal today. It's a big what if. And so I'd like to change that so that when we do put in a grant, we do get those things. And I think that there's a possibility that we're looking at that kind of change. I know I've spoken to Chair Paiska that was a similar intention with the tree mortality, was to see if we can open up some funding to make things available. I do have some questions on this. And I think we need to do something. Number one, we are not leaving this room without doing something. We have to be able to move something forward more so than where we are today. Let's continue to highlight the chai, but let's also recognize that with the work being done at Middle Creek, it's about also water quality and algae. We need to look at our lake and make sure that it's better. Hence why people worked on Save the Lake years ago. That never went through. We've known that there's a need to do something to fix the habitat that is a part of all of our lives. I have some questions and then some comments. One question is, so right now in the state of California, it is listed as an endangered species, correct? Since 2014 or 2015?
I'm told it's listed as threatened. I'm told under the California ESA, there's no real distinction between threatened and endangered status. So it's been listed under state law as threatened since 2014.
So you just said there's no difference? So
I'm told. I don't have any direct knowledge of that. But we distinguish between a state level threatened designation and a federal endangered designation. But as far as whether there's an endangered designation under the state law, or whether there is and there's no real practical difference, I would have to defer to the experts in the room.
Okay. In speaking with Fish and Wildlife over the past week, I'm trying to figure out what's the difference between it being listed and declaring an emergency, because that would seem to be the listing is a declaration of emergency is what I'm getting from Fish and Wildlife. So I'm kind of curious, how did we get to declaring a specific emergency for the Hitch versus talking about the listing of it?
Jurisdictionally, a county emergency proclamation is just that. And whatever rain falls or doesn't in terms of buckets of money, certainly I believe both state and federal agencies would take notice of a county-driven emergency proclamation. They would certainly take notice of an emergency proclamation by the Office of the Governor. The listing by U.S. Fish and Wildlife under the Endangered Species Act has two moving parts. So again, in the never-ending paper trail, the start of that paper trail is what I think is such a significant pivotal moment, and that was when the Center for Biological Diversity settled its lawsuit with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in April of 2022, and by court order of that settlement, they reopened their investigation. So their prior denial of endangered listing of the Hitch is no more. They have started this kind of what they call a 12-month findings process that actually takes 24 months because, you know, government. And in the meantime, also in the paper trail, because if there's going to be this 2-year delay while the feds decide whether or not the species does deserve to be listed as endangered on the federal side. There was a request by multiple parties that U.S. Fish and Wildlife go ahead and do a rarely, if ever used, emergency procedure by which the fish could be declared endangered under the Federal Endangered Species Act immediately on an emergency basis while this ongoing review takes place. So they would be listed right off the gate if the emergency listing request is granted. Whatever happens with a listing under federal law happens, but we're still going to come back in 2 years as that court-ordered review process comes. And so what happens with a federal listing, what happens with a county emergency proclamation? In both cases, there is some hope that we're going to be able to shake money, precious money out for projects that will receive higher priority based on that understanding of the emergency. There are maybe some other things involved with a federal listing that are less easy to predict, but that's what it is. So you'll hear federal listing used two different ways. One is this reopened investigation and whether it should be listed under federal law. That's a 2-year process. And then you're going to hear some stakeholders that have asked in the meantime for the feds to go ahead and list it right now.
But meanwhile, it is listed within the state of California, again, just to...
As threatened.
Just to separate between federal and state, there's two separate processes. One of them is listed, one of them is not.
Listed as threatened under state law, yes.
Yes, okay. And the reason I bring it up is number one, it's not that it concerns me, but I feel like we're asking something we're not allowed to ask. If you look at the definition of a state of emergency, it does not provide a state of emergency for endangerment of species or animals. It does say for, I don't have the right terminology, but infestations or disease. And I looked up and I tried to figure out, have we ever done this for the condor or for other things? And I've never seen that happen before, but obviously it makes it to the endangered species list or the threatened species list. And I'm just curious, is that something that you've looked at? Is that something that's even appropriate to ask the governor within the law that emergency proclamations provide?
Yeah, yes, for two reasons. One, this may be a slow-moving emergency, somewhere between 6 and 40 years, depending on who you ask. But it's an emergency involving the environment, and it's an emergency involving natural processes that we don't fully understand and which do represent a threat to the citizens of Lake County. It is not as rapid as a catastrophic wildfire. It is not as quirky as an atmospheric river, but it's natural. I see somebody raising their hands. They may want to chime in on this. No? But the other thing, as highlighted in some of the whereases, is we face a procedural emergency. Whatever we may think of the state of emergency, it's pretty clear that there are a whole bunch of people stampeding down toward the county with their understanding that a state of emergency exists. Their thoughtful desire to get some of these projects funded that have been kicking around for several years, hopefully in time to save the fish. I can't cite chapter and verse, maybe Anita can, as to the wisdom of doing this, but I can't think that it is, and not to use Chair Pyska as an example, but I mean, pervasive tree mortality, that was kind of out there. It wasn't necessarily well established as an idea and all that, but she went ahead with it, and when this board passed it, and now the governor did sign off on it. So if there's some distinctions between those two examples, I'll certainly listen to other people who have better knowledge of that. But I see this county facing two states of emergency that are valid for an emergency proclamation. One, the actual physical decline of the fish such that an extinction event is imminent, and we have to, as a county, take certain actions, not only to keep our citizens happy, but to satisfy certain legal obligations. You know, we can't have this knowledge and not take action. And I believe the emergency proclamation is the appropriate way to do that.
So I'm just going to correct you. The state had a tree mortality or a disaster already in place, and then we did our local emergency. And it was with the infestation of disease for trees that can fall on people. And that is the connection to the peril. The state of emergency means the duly proclaimed existence of conditions of disaster, of extreme peril to the safety of persons and properties. And that's how it fit in there. So this is why he's asking. So how do we justify that within what the definition is of a state of emergency?
Fair question. I may defer to some in the audience for that. But among many things that have been described in recent months is the prospect that it's not just natives. Everyone in this county who's been here any amount of time has memory, short-term memory of this Hitch running hard, much more populous than it was. And one of the things I was most stricken by at the December summit was this discussion of family gathering and culture and subsistence. You know, it was not that long ago where this fish was fished for food. And it provided food security for people who did not have good access to education, employment, other sources of food. And some may say, oh, well, you know, it's not that way now. You know, how could we possibly look at this fish as a food security item? Like people would actually starve if this fish went extinct. And it's like, okay, I kind of get the point, but the larger point is if we use today's understanding versus yesterday's understanding, I think we're viewing it incorrectly. There was a time when not only was this fish culturally important to our native peoples, but it was a matter of food subsistence and food security. And so the peril to our community, and maybe we'll hear more about that, would be not just loss of culture, not just loss of prestige in the environmental community, but a real changing of the guard where we had something and then we lost it. And the peril is that we will lose that food security.
And so I'm not arguing what we can do. I think we can do whatever we want. It's the request to the governor. I just want to make sure it's in line with the law of what can be requested and what can't. And I think that it's in the gray for me. There's something that you keep repeating, and that's it. There's a lot of unknowns. And we just heard a conversation.
You could answer the legal question. I would like to hear that you asked a question. There's our attorney. I'd like to hear her answer.
Where'd she go? Okay. I can tell you that when you're talking about the Emergency Services Act and the Government Code, that is a list, but it's not an exhaustive list. So just for purposes of legal interpretation, it doesn't have to necessarily fall within one of those. I can also tell you that the OES, the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, does list the Emergency Services Act. It also notes that California defines emergency as an unforeseen situation calling for immediate action. It also defines an emergency as a situation of grave character and serious moment, evidenced by an imminent and substantial threat to public health and safety. And that's the Los Osos Valley Associates case versus City of San Luis Obispo. What I would suggest is that you just ensure that the basis, if your board decides to move forward with an emergency declaration, just as always, that the basis for that emergency is indicated. It cannot just be a bald statement. You do have references in the recitals, et cetera, so you may want to just refer back to those. And certainly, there's no guarantee that the state will agree with your assessment of emergency conditions, but Supervisor Sabatier is correct. That doesn't preclude your board from moving forward if you find that it's an emergency.
So I will move on. Thank you for the
Yeah, I was just wanting to get to it because we're going to have a long one there, it seemed like.
And so there's been a lot of comments about unknown. Last time we received some data from Big Valley Rancheria, specifically Ms. Ryan, and then we received some other data information from some of the ag community. In my opinion, it was very contradictory. That left me with a not enough information to be able to say one's right, one's wrong, or make a decision. I know you've stated a couple of times that there's a lot of unknowns or uncertainties. We've received that from Fred this afternoon as well. And I just have to say that there's some concerns about some of the requests. I know they're not requests for us, but for the state to look at creating new regulations that could have impact on whatever the impact might be, without knowing if those are the things that are actually impacting the current population decrease. I think one of the things that's missing from this document is a request for everyone to be at the same table. It seems we have a meeting here and a meeting there and a meeting here, and I'm not seeing a request for everyone to be at the same table. That I feel is something that's missing from the document. If we're not all together at the same place, then we're not working together to solve the problem. And I think that's one of our issues that we've had. And we need to ensure that there's a specific place for everybody to be able to speak and take part in providing data, analyzing data, and deciding what the solutions are, rather than receiving the solutions from a whole bunch of different places that may, again, contradict one another. And there's something that's kind of not discussed throughout this whole thing that I just keep kind of going back to, is where does climate change fit into this, where we have to figure out how to deal with climate change rather than trying to figure out how to deal with specific entities and how they're interacting with the land or the water. Which one is the issue that we're dealing with? Drought is a very real thing. We've had a declared drought. And so to me, climate change is missing from some of this information. You speak of drought at the beginning, but then it kind of disappears in the rest of the information. And I'll just get to the point. I am, again, with looking in, and I've never seen a declaration for any species that I've ever seen when I did some Googling and doing my own research, which is not a professional research, but I could not find a declaration from the state or from a locality for a declared emergency for a species. It seems to be the endangered species threatened list or endangered list. And I would like to see if maybe we can amend our drought proclamation to say that Hitch are an important cultural and ecological factor in our area, and to add some points of what it is that we're planning to do to make sure that we're coming up with the right solutions and not throwing solutions at the wall. I see a lot of potential solutions, but I'm also hearing a lot of unknowns, and I'd hate to try so many things where there's impacts and consequences we're unaware of that eventually doesn't lead us to the solution that we should be doing. So interacting at the table, finding the right data and the right solutions, and coming back to us ASAP for support for those things, I think is of utmost importance, and tying it to the drought issue, because no water in the creek is absolutely a drought issue. So that's where I am. We need to do something today. We need to move forward. And I just feel there's a lot of unknowns of consequences on some of the things that are listed here.
And to the drought, clearly that it can't be helping. I think has been noted here. It's been tanking during times both of rain and drought, and so I wouldn't want to tie our response necessarily to an amendment of the drought proclamation, if only because we don't know when the governor will change that or if the rain will change that. And I think the state of emergency, even if it rains 40 days and 40 nights this year, I'm still taking it as a state of emergency. You know, one good rain year is not necessarily going to be sufficient to turn this fish's fortunes around. Also, you've had several conversations with some of our agencies. I have too. I think one potential benefit of this emergency proclamation is, again, depending on what happens with these other state proclamations and the drought proclamation in particular, we want continuity of effort. So they could lean on a local emergency proclamation to give them some continuity of effort and sustained importance in their own internal funding processes. They're at mid-year budget too, just like we are. They have to get some budget requests up for the coming years. So again, we've noted there are plenty of big ticket items that have been crafted for long-term lake health response. But as noted in the introduction, even with all these agencies talking together, we just don't have a good firm plan for short-term response this year. Boots on the ground, who's rescuing fish this year, who's doing observations and stuff like that. We do have some voluntary actions that have been proposed. Very grateful to those people that are stepping up locally to do that. But I wouldn't want to tie it necessarily to a drought proclamation, even though it seems logical that we would do so. I do think the state of emergency transcends the drought itself.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose I'll make a statement. Your questions were helpful, Supervisor Sabatier, but in the letters that I received, it states the Hitch are on the brink of extinction. So for me, that tells me enough that I need. I said I was ready to move forward last time, but we'll have the discussion, see where we go from there. And those are my thoughts, and they were last time, and they haven't changed.
Yeah, I said it to you last time, you know, the emergency question is answered for me. You know, I talked about, was the experience as a young man on the Upper Lake Reservation, of, you know, just the streams being black where we could catch these things. And we did, you know, that was food for the year. And that wasn't that long ago. I'd like to say, well, I guess I am old. You know, no, it was when I was a young guy, you know, running around on the reses. So, not on my watch. This has been talked about all my life. There's obviously both sides. I said it in this room before. We just need to come together over it. I saw the letter from our Lake County Farm Bureau, and I think there's a way to do it. I hope that, you know, this takes a 4/5 vote. So we're going to need this board to really get in and have that conversation on how we move this thing forward. I think what I saw in the letter was, you know, one of the controversial numbers here, number 6, you know, and I agree, it's tough to ask the state to make decisions. We want to have local control as much as possible, but like some of the folks that got up here and talked today, we've been talking about for 43 years, waiting for the state to make a decision. They actually had to be sued just recently, as you stated, to go back and look at it again. You know, and so my thought is the regulations being one of the big words, you know, if we get to a point where we're at an impasse as a board, that we look at that number 6 section potentially and say, you know, issue informative orders to assure that, you know, maybe take out the emergency regulations word. I'm just throwing it out there, but we've got to get, it's a no-brainer for me as far as it goes with the emergency situation that we have here today. And I said it before. I'm not sitting in this room bringing the agricultural department. I'm not saying that, you know, what's happening here in Lake County has not had an effect on the Hitch, but we got to come to a way as everybody, because it's the last thing. We already get enough bad publicity here in Lake County of, hey, don't go to Lake County and go in the lake because your dog could get sick. It's all over the news. You know, a lot of times they say any publicity is good publicity, but that is not what needs to be done. The most important thing, and I've said this before, is that lake. It's sustained life here for thousands of years, and we need to take a step forward on how we're trying not only to protect the Hitch. What I was reported today, I didn't know that we had other declining species. I didn't know that. That was the first time I heard it here setting up on the diocese. But we knew the lake was sick, or we wouldn't have pushed hard to have C. Agar Curry help us with the Blue Ribbon Committee. And there's a lot of work to be done there that'll be going on long after I'm sitting here. But we got to get something today. I don't think there's anything that needs to be removed. But if we come to an impasse, we've got to get something done. I appreciate you saying that, Supervisor Sabatier, as we move forward. And I know, you know, it's a challenge. I sat right here at this diocese last time, and, had a tribal person in this county saying how they were disgusted with me as a tribal person and what was going on. But as we live in this world, we've got to work together. We're never going to agree. I guess if we did a good job, everybody who leaves this room here will be unhappy. And then we probably came to a pass that is equal for everyone. So we're entitled with making this decision, and I'm willing to do that. And whatever happens, happens. But protecting those Hitch are more important. I also had this morning in public input, and I don't know if she's still here, but I think she's a teacher. Let me see, where's that paper?
I think she left.
She may have left. She talked about educating our youth and those types of things. This would be a pretty neat project for some of those youth to go out and to work on something like this. We talk about lake science, but what type of a project? We know that we already have through EPA departments, through the tribes and other organizations, our FFA departments, they take trips to the creek. But maybe this year it's, hey, let's go make sure there's some hitch somewhere in these creeks and start to do those analysis on, kind of boots on the ground type of stuff. But anyway, making sure you know where I stand before you come up and make your comments. I'm ready to move forward with it. And I think telling our story here in Lake County, and just to let you guys know, I do that all the time. We did the TID today, but telling our story not only from the cultural side, which is, who I am, but representing this entire community, this entire county. There's plenty of stuff that I'm mad about in this county. I'm mad we don't own more water in this county in Clear Lake. That really makes me mad, and that affects all of us, not just the tribal communities, all of our communities. So, ready to move forward with it today. I hope we get the 4/5 vote. And if we don't, I agree, that'll be a bad sign for Lake County as far as I'm concerned, so that's what I have to say. I'm not gonna go as technical as you, but it's just, hey, common sense. When I ran for office, I want to bring common sense to government. It doesn't always mix together, but I hope I've been able to show that. I did the agritourism. I went to all grapes. I went to walnuts. I understand the value that it brings for our community and who we are. We're currently working in South County to do a multi-use trail so we can encourage riding of the horse. Everything that we do of who we are is, I guess I can say I'm all Lake County, man. Doesn't matter how it goes out. So hopefully today we'll do that. And it's not enough. And some people are going to say it's too much. But if this opens the door for us to have some of the ideas, a hatchery or other things here for this fish, I think it's awesome. So anyway, that's where I am. I'll talk to each and every one of you. Either, that's all right. We can exchange it. We're not going to agree on everything, but I am not here, and in my vote today, when I do take it, will not be against agriculture. It will not be against farmers. It will not be just for the tribe. It'll be, we need to come together to save this species in the best way that we can. That's what it will be. So, and we need some Hitch wood statues around the lake, not just bass. So we'll take that next step, so.
Chair Pyska, I had one more thing I forgot. If I can add it real quick?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so aside from that, I remember earlier talking about the Blue Ribbon Committee. Well, in the document that established it in 2017 under C, it states, Clear Lake is the oldest species-rich warm water natural lake in North America. It contributes to the surrounding ecosystems of native plants and animals, as well as species introduced in the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Clear Lake and the surrounding environment is also home to endangered and rare animal species. Clear Lake suffers from numerous environment hazards and negatively affects the quality of the water and the lake's fish, including all the following issues. And that's another reason why I feel like we should create a committee in the Blue Ribbon, and I'm going to go ahead and make sure we bring that at the next meeting, so that way, no matter what happens here, after that, we can have a place where people can come together and talk about this issue, because it states it in here. So talk to Eric Sklar, since he came last time, and say, hey, let's see what we can do when it comes to this and that. So just adding that to it. I
think it's pretty incredible, the amount of people that are in the room today and the amount of people that care. And I think everybody in here is committed to doing something and figuring out a way forward today. And I'm kind of back and forth if this proclamation, just by definition, is the way to go. But there's some pretty deep passion from my colleague here, and maybe sometimes we have to forge our own way, and maybe that's the thing to do. So I always appreciate your input. I think that there definitely does need to be some facilitated group, some coordinated effort that includes local interested parties and our staff, as well as the agencies. I feel like that's been a missing link, and I don't know if that's, if the blue ribbon, if that's where you feel that should be. I don't know. That's been a question of mine. We have our Fish and Wildlife Advisory Committee, which was brought up earlier today. We have 6 vacancies on that committee. In the past, that committee's been tasked with different jobs, but there are 11 seats on that committee, and there are district representatives, there's education, there's a pretty broad group of people that can sit on that, but there's no tribal representation. And I think that's something that we could bring back with the resolution and add a tribal seat there, and give that advisory group some direction with recommendations that come out of all of this work, because we do have a lot of different agencies doing this work, and we've received letters, but and maybe it's gonna come with that strategic plan that we haven't seen yet, but I would like to see everything in one document. I would like to also get input from staff. And I know you've mentioned that you have spoken with all of the agencies to put this proclamation together, but we also need to operate we need to be advised by our staff. They are the experts that work for us. And so I want to make sure that that's happened. And maybe we can get a response from our administration office and our water resources department about how this has been collaborated and what they recommend with what we have before us today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have reviewed the materials regarding the Hitch. However, in the admin, we're not experts in this type of program or this type of request. And I would defer to Water Resources. We have had that discussion. Our Chief Climate Resiliency Officer has reviewed and has spoken to Mr. Green, Supervisor Green, but I still think that I would defer to Water Resources on what their review of this or what next steps they would like to see happen regarding this item.
Scott?
Well, let's make sure my audio is still working.
You're good?
Well, you're kind of put me on the hot seat here, but I will, I'll make a couple of statements. The first thing I want to be clear, the Water Resources Department does not manage fish in the lake. We have a number of responsibilities but we aren't the keepers of the fish in the lake. So we don't have that expertise to do that. But what we can do, and what I think you're asking us to do, is to bring whatever resources we have to bear to help protect the fish and help promote improvement of habitat and those types of things. And I stated at the January meeting that though Highland Springs is not designed to provide water downstream for habitat, if we have an opportunity to do something, we will do that. And so I guess what I am willing and able to do is to say that as a department, we are committed to work collaboratively with all the interested parties to do what we can and bring the resources that we can to the table. I do have concerns, and Supervisor Green, you've sat in my office and heard my concerns about asking, state and federal agencies to make decisions that could affect us. I would prefer that we maintain that control and work as a county and as a group of people to include the tribes and the agricultural community and our business community and our supervisors to come to develop projects and ways to try to help the fish. I'm concerned about handing over those decisions to others. I'd rather keep them internally and keep them within our county. And I guess to just conclude, we'll do what we certainly can do, and we'll do what we can and work collaboratively. I hope that answers any questions.
So one item that I think is missing from this is a statement of our commitment to work collaboratively with all of with our local interested parties and with the agencies. And I think that's important to be added. I don't know how you all feel about that, but just as a statement to each other. I have some concerns with some of the asks in here.
You got Susan waving at you?
Oh, what? Yes, sorry.
I'm sorry. I just want to add one thing. In whatever measure we move forward, I would like to include the Chief Climate Resiliency Officer as part of that group, collaborative group. I think it's important.
I think it's important too. And the reason I bring that up is, I don't know what the best group is. If you've been a part of the Blue Ribbon Committee for a long time, if you feel like that's the best place.
Well, it is a place we can at least move forward with something, but you mentioned the Fish and Wildlife Committee, and how many positions are open?
No, that's going to be a commitment on our.
Or advisory?
6 vacancies.
Well, and that's the other thing, and I'm not highlighting this for to stack on or make any points or anything. I'm just highlighting it because I'm reading it right here. So it's each district, 1 member of the Recreation Department, 1 member of Agricultural Department, an ex officio member department, not sure exactly what that means, 1 member of the Education Department, 1 member of the Land Conservation Department, and 1 member of the Fish and Wildlife Conservation Department. Doesn't necessarily list tribes, but it was developed in 1979. So I don't know if that's got to be a discussion to kind of reestablish that so that way there is representation or something along those lines. But that way everyone is at the table in that advisory capacity, if that makes sense. Yeah. Because what happens, I feel, in some instances is there's an initiative from pro or con to try and, we see it in cannabis. No one ever feels equitable when they're on there. It's like, no, they have more of the cannabis. Then the other says, no, we have more of this. So I'm highlighting that because I'm just reading off of what is here, and I know that policy is dated back to 79, so it makes sense. Yeah.
Ancient times. Well, when I was considering this, I was considering leaving that sort of undefined, but tasking our staff with bringing us back a recommendation of what that collaborative facilitated group looks like. But if that is something that you want to go forward with Blue Ribbon Committee, I'm okay with it. I think we also probably need to have the Fish and Wildlife Advisory Committee retooled and up and running to be supportive. And one of the reasons I discussed that with the Big Valley members last week, and then the more I thought about it, We have, for example, well, I'll explain this. This is my Cold Creek example. So I got pictures of pretty major flooding in Kelseyville and Clark Drive after the atmospheric rivers, and the residents there couldn't believe the amount of flooding, and they sent all these pictures, and Public Works went out there, and then code enforcement went out there, and it turns out that the creek is completely dammed up with debris, and the landowners didn't know it was happening, and then the tribal members said, hey, did you know Cold Creek was dry? And so it probably is likely dry downstream from these dams. And what is the process that we have? How can we educate landowners who have property on the creek on the process, which is a little cumbersome, to get the permits and do that creek clearing? So I thought that Fish and Wildlife Advisory Committee could look at that process and do some education and outreach to the community. And that's just one piece of the many things that we need to do. And I don't know that it needs to be in this proclamation, but I just bring it here as maybe just another reason to not be quite so specific in the proclamation, because there's so many options out there that we could do. I know we talked about the Adobe Creek and Highland Springs reservoirs. We talked about, you asked if it was possible, and Scott said, well, sure, we can give it a shot. And I asked him, what does it look like to develop a feasibility study? And he said that's probably pretty lengthy and potentially expensive, or there could be a moment in time when the Hitch are in distress and he figures out how to let the water out, and we kind of see if that works that way. So again, I'm not sure that needs to be in the proclamation. It's just something that we direct staff to do. And then again, I'm not really comfortable with the number 6 and how that's worded. So those are my thoughts, and I'm wondering if anyone has a response to what I've put out. Supervisor Spatier?
Yeah, just a quick question. I don't think that the blue ribbon is a bad idea, but I do have a question. There already is a CHI task force. Where does that fit in? Because I don't want two separate groups having two separate conversations. I want to make sure that either the idea of the Blue Ribbon Committee is invited into the CHI task force, the CHI task force is invited into the Blue Ribbon Committee. It's just, we can't have separate conversations.
From what I understand, the Hitch task force is government to government. And I don't know that and maybe a member here of that, someone can tell me, is our county staff a part of that Hitch task force? If it's government to government, is Water Resources a part of that? And then maybe expanding that to include a board member so that we have more direct communication with that work that's happening. Oh, can you come up to the microphone? I haven't opened public comment, but I did ask a question.
I'm sorry. So
Can you
the
just
answer
state
to
your
that
name?
question is, yes, it is now opened. It is no longer just a government-to-government operation. We are looking to invite other companies or agencies and organizations that are interested in partaking. It originally started as a government-to-government conversation because of the emergency status of it. Director Bonham, Chuck Bonham from the CDFW, he's the one that has suggested to us when we spoke to them about creating the task force, and he's the one that gave us his employee, Felipe Lewis, to create that and do the emergency summit. It was all their idea, and we just jumped in with it and was like, yes, let's do it right now.
Great.
So that was their initial thing, but it is opening up to other people. to
Okay,
answer
and your
questions.
name?
I'm sorry, Chris McLeod, Big Valley Tribal Treasurer.
Thank you, Chris. So is that another option that you would consider because it's already a group that's functioning and just expand it? we have so many things going on.
Right, no, I'm only bringing that up because I didn't really know if that was an option, but if that's an option, that's fine. I don't want to do, that's why it said blue ribbon rather than us creating another one and having
Right.
redundancy. But I don't mind still bringing it as a subject and talking to Eric about more dialogue in regards to that, but not to have any other type of overlapping discussion or anything like that. But like I said, the projects, there's many projects that are in that, in those proposals that revolve around the Hitch. So it's not something that I'm advocating or not advocating for on the proclamation. I'm talking about after, so that way there's more discussion either way. So the proclamation is what it is, emergency proclamation, and I guess we're going to hash out which numbers are going to go or whatever the case may be, and that's that. And so, yeah, I'm fine with it as it is, so I've said that already.
Supervisor Green?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the comments. Yeah, we're catching up on this. So the question of how and when does the county get to stick its nose into things is appropriate. And I actually had those discussions.
Well,
you know,
I wouldn't say maybe stick our nose in things, but be
okay,
collaborative.
I said that, all right? I said that. But I was the one who managed to show up in December at what turned out to be a clearly Hitch task force and said, hey, we need a task force. And they looked at me kind of funny. And internally, yeah, we have commissions. We have Ag Advisory has chimed in, been very helpful, super helpful. Farm Bureau has chimed in. One thing I would urge caution for is, you know, how many Zooms have these guys put in the last 3 months? So, you know, if we do talk about spinning up a county committee of sorts later, one, we can do it later. We don't necessarily need to settle that today as part of this proclamation. But two, it's really encouraging to see all the synergy and energy that is going into these processes. So I think we're going to end up doing both. You've heard about working groups and intergovernmental consultations, technical stuff. What does the science mean? I fully expect those consultations to continue at an accelerated pace for at least the next year or two. So they don't need direction for us to do that. Again, we do have a Clear Lake Hitch task force of sorts that has been spun up, and I believe CDFW has agreed to take lead on that. We have this Clear Lake Hitch strategy that has been in development for 4 years. Again, the federal U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is in charge of that. As part of the court order that U.S. Fish and Wildlife is bound to do. They have to do public outreach as they consider the formal listing along the line. To some of the asks in here, they do and will encourage further public participation, not just by the county, but all our stakeholders. For example, in bullet item 6, should State Water Resources decide to expand upon its listening sessions, which it's already doing, and propose any type of regulations, you better believe there's going to be public hearings, opportunities for comment, opportunities for county input. And so I highlight that one because a lot of people have concerns about number 6. I'll just state this. I think the state's going to do what the state's going to do anyway. I do think we are expressing local control and asking them to go ahead and get on with it. To me, I know it is hard to deal with unknowns, and one way to get over that is to start dealing with some knowns. From prior work involved in cannabis regulation, I have some history with the state water boards. I have trust that they are going to be fair and open-minded. I think their listening sessions they've been conducting are proof positive of that. But I will just offer, if there are concerns about number 6 in particular, all these bullet points are up for discussion. Number 6, if it's going to be problematic, can certainly come out, as has been suggested by multiple parties. But as to whether we need to spin up yet another county led task force, I would kind of caution against thinking about that right now, if only because all these other agencies are doing what they're doing. And there is a little bit of history here where the county is not universally perceived as being the most helpful or the most expeditious agency involved here. I think we need to partner with all our agencies, and I'm confident with the assorted committees and commissions and task forces that have spun up right now. But again, if we want to have another discussion at a future date on that, I'm certainly open to that.
Well, I was not, I didn't intend to spin up another committee. I was just raising the question of, we could put a request in here to expand the task force to include the county and to include a board of supervisor, so that we're there and we know what's happening and we can be a part of it and have a little bit more pro-action. Supervisor Sabatier?
Yeah, last thing that I have a concern on is the beginning of number 7. With any unknowns, number 6 and number 7 have the potential to impact economically. And if there's unknowns as to if that actually is going to be a reason for the hitch diminishing, then I want to make sure it's known before we create any sort of impact. And so the idea of emergency regulations for sport fishing, which is a major part of hospitality here, and the issue of stream flows when our own GSP shows that there is little to no connection between groundwater to surface water. I think that 6 and 7 need to be reviewed more. And I didn't state that properly, but the report says that they did not see a significant connection when reviewing the use of groundwater in comparison to the stream flows. Obviously, water trickles down eventually and builds up into the aquifer. Not the expert on that one, just paraphrasing. But 6 and 7, the beginning of 7, are the only ones that I am concerned asking the state to come in, make changes, again, without the strategic plan being done. Once that's done, there's a better idea of what is being requested and what does work versus asking now.
And I will just highlight, among the things that are known, it is not unknown. Both the state water boards and CDFW are very aware of this, are actively working this issue, and in CDFW's case has already dropped a significant letter with several substantial asks. Now, again, we're not addressing any of those asks in any real concrete substance today. But these aren't in there for no reason. Again, I'm willing to jettison them if there's any uncertainty as to the impact. But the unknown as to what they might do is already an unknown. We know they're going to do something. We don't know when. I don't know that anyway. They're looking for concrete action this year, even as they continue long-term planning efforts that are beneficial to the lake and the fish. They're very clear in their statements so far. They're looking for voluntary action. California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the State Water Resources Control Board.
Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. Everyone knows that, and I already mentioned this, everyone's excited about the prospect of doing more long-range planning, putting more money into this and stuff like that. Everyone's kind of scratching their heads, with some exception, with our locals who are willing to spin up some additional data gathering efforts and stuff like that, voluntary actions. So even if they get fired up on the regulations and all that, I think there's no expectation that they're going to pull the trigger on that without involving extensive stakeholder input, and just rulemaking in general at the state level is time-consuming and lots of meetings. So they're in there for a reason. They can certainly come out if those reasons give offense, but we're going to have a long year of dealing with certain actions and certain requests that either we make of these agencies or that these agencies are going to make of us. And so I don't see anything harmful in there, even without knowing what the future holds in terms of potential regulations. I think the dialogue is hugely important. It was interesting to watch the prior presentation from USGS, seeing that not just the Hitch, but all our fish are in decline. That is rightfully concerning for this county. That is rightfully concerning for Fish and Game Commission. And yeah, there's been communication. It's been a very pointed ask that we don't know, the full impact. Scooping up some bass along with the carp. I don't know if that's a bad idea, but if they're going to talk about it at all, come to the county and let's talk about it. And I don't see any harm in asking for our agencies to come sit down with us and talk about these things. We know they're proposing regulations. We know they have thoughts on what this county should do. And so it is unlike all the other emergencies we typically deal with. We have an emergency that also has a paper trail attached to it and several proposed actions. So I've taken out everything that would come anywhere close to a concrete action, but 6 and 7 are in there for a reason.
Supervisor Crandall?
I think there's someone online that can speak to some of this, and I'll just add that in number 7 briefly, it really just talks about to consider whether establishment of one or more hatcheries or refuges within the county of Lake is feasible. So it's not really doing anything, it's just stating that they're going to take reasonable steps to consider whether the regulations or amendments of sport fishing regulations are needed to reduce predation. So I don't agree with you on number 7.
Who's in the Zoom room?
It's a CDF
Felipe
staffer.
LaLuz?
Yes. Philippe?
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is
Yeah, go ahead, Felipe.
Yes, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
My name is Felipe LaLuz. I'm a senior environmental scientist with CDFW, and I facilitate the Clear Lake Hitch Task Force. And I'm chiming in right now. I hear a lot of confusion about what teams are active and what their roles are. And so I'm hoping to shed some light on that. I think I'm going to split it up into like longer term, big scale, big picture issues, and then a more immediate response. So there is the Blue Ribbon Committee, which many of you are familiar with. There's also the federally facilitated Clear Lake Hitch Conservation Strategy Team. And they are facilitating the conservation strategy that has been discussed. I facilitate for the state the Clear Lake Hitch Task Force, and this came out of the government-to-government consultation that Chris McLeod had mentioned earlier. We meet monthly. I'm happy that the county is now participating. We did have somebody from Water Resources Program at the table at our last meeting. And definitely encourage Department of Public Works and Water Resources to continue participating in the task force. And then at a finer scale, the State Water Resources Control Board has an implementation team focusing more on keeping on water, as that's the purview of the water. And they have a website up. If you Google State Water Resources Control Board Hitch, it's the first thing that pops up. I encourage you all to look at that website, sign up for their emailing list. They're doing some great outreach and still have some more stuff planned in the future. But just in general, I'm sorry, there's one more team that just recently formed that Fred Favor had mentioned, and this is more of a scientific working group with UC Davis, which is more of an academic team. And I realize this is a lot of teams. But each has its own role, whether it be policy, long-term planning, or research. And so I'm happy to help you all navigate this and try and figure out which teams are most appropriate for which people to engage in.
And how do all the teams work together?
Well, there's a lot of overlap in membership, and there is no single guiding committee overseeing all of these teams. And I'm not sure what sort of structure we could put in place to facilitate that.
I think that would be important for us to have a local understanding of what's going on. Ms. Grant?
Just from what I'm hearing, there might be kind of a compromise with regard to number 6. Certainly Supervisor Green's correct, the state's going to do what it's going to do, so a statement that they can do it is not really necessary. A broad statement that they just take regulatory steps such as may be more than certain of you have a comfort level with. So you could say something more to the effect that State Water Resources Board shall work directly with county stakeholders to consider the promulgation of regulations to assure the continued viability of the Clear Lake Hitch and other aquatic species upon receipt of stream-specific emergency flow recommendations from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or other fisheries agency. That way, the county would be a participant with the state and would have an active hand in it regardless of the configuration of a committee, and it would still be for the same goal. It's just a suggestion.
Run.
It's an excellent suggestion. If we're going to edit it, I would just suggest my own poor word choice. Instead of stream-specific, watershed-specific might be clearer. Thank you.
I think we should open it up to the public. They've
Okay.
been waiting long enough.
Okay. All right. So at this time, we'll open it up to the public, so you can come up to the podium, state your name, have 3 minutes, and we'll hear from everybody.
Hi again, good afternoon, Rebecca Harper, Lake County Farm Bureau. I'd first like to begin by addressing a question that you asked Jessica with regard to what type of infrastructure might exist for educating landowners on their responsibilities and the permitting processes associated with debris cleanup on properties that are along a stream. So Jared Sellers, who is now the point person for the USFWS Clear Lake Hitch Conservation Strategy Committee, and I have been working very closely on this. And so as a joint effort, we're working on putting together some resources as an outreach effort so that those can be distributed to the community, and then they could inquire to our agencies. And essentially, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services would then be able to negate available monetary resources to projects that may have the most impact on the stream. So that's something that Lake County Farm Bureau and Jared Sellers with the United States Fish and Wildlife Services are working on jointly right now. And I'm hopeful that that will be a great benefit to landowners and provide some infrastructure there. Aside from that, I'd like to express our sincere gratitude for being involved at this point of the discussion, and my hope that we'll be continued to be involved as we continue moving forward. That being said, the agricultural stakeholders of Lake County support the approval of an emergency proclamation that does not include requests to the State Water Board to pursue water use restrictions. We feel that as a stakeholder group, we are making progress with state and federal agencies through our ongoing and deliberate conversations, commitments, and contributions. Encouraging the pursuit of regulation as stated in number 6 of the emergency proclamation would only be detrimental to the work that we have been doing thus far. Our stakeholders plan to pursue specific voluntary actions that we have outlined with these agencies that will benefit the Clear Lake Hitch as soon as possible, while also identifying and developing long-term solutions. For more information on those commitments and contributions, I'd like to refer you to the last 2 pages of this lengthy document that California Farm Bureau and Lake County Farm Bureau worked jointly on. The last 2 pages of that outline what our commitments and contributions are, in addition to a document that was distributed to you at the prior Board of Supervisors meeting regarding this matter. This gets pretty technical, but it is worth the read if you get the opportunity. If you're looking for the Cliff Notes version, like I said, refer to those last 2 pages on what our commitments and contributions are. We also feel that the Clear Lake Hitch Conservation Strategy, facilitated by United States Fish and Wildlife Services, is instrumental to this conversation. This strategy outlines reasonable and productive voluntary actions that can be implemented by many stakeholder groups, including agricultural stakeholders. The county should lean on this strategy as we continue to identify and implement additional possible solutions. So just in closing, I'd like to thank you for your hard work and attention to this matter of great importance to our communities.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alicia Castellanos. I work at Big Valley Rancheria EPA. I'm also an environmental assistant there. I wanted to thank you for this discussion today. I really hope that the right decision is made. I feel that we need to move forward with this emergency proclamation for the sake of our hitch and the traditions of our people. I want to be able to learn and pass this tradition of hitching down to future generations Please do what you can to make this possible. We need to save the Hitch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brock Zoller, Lake County farmer, Kelseyville. I'd like to thank you again for having this discussion. I wanted to talk again about Mr. Fryer's data there. It was reassuring to see data that's duplicated by different agencies. California Fish and Wildlife had done some, and they did it for an 8-year period, and his 4 years coincided with almost exactly with what they came up, but he was missing 1 year, which was the highest year. So if he'd had that in there and measured it, and it came out like theirs, it wouldn't have grafted the way it did and made it look like the fish were being eliminated. It would look like they just ran into a drought period, as they have in the past, and they're not really there. So the other thing I'd like to point out, I don't see the emergency myself. If you put all the data together and look at it, it just shows they're having ups and downs, and they will be back again. They're not going to be back like they were in the past, where we had to be careful going across the creek, but that was a long time ago before a lot of changes came in the lake. I'd like to point this out. This is Big Valley Groundwater Recharge Investigation. This was written a long time ago for the Lake County Flood Control and Water Conservation District, and it was a prelude to maybe a dam being built in the canyon of Kelsey Creek. But it's incredibly interesting to read it because it talks about the geology of water flow in here, and there's some things here that really would be interesting for you to read. For one thing, I just heard on the news the other day that Yolo County is pumping water out of Cache Creek now and putting it in the ground down there in the Sacramento Valley. This is an earlier time for them to be pumping really out of Cache Creek, as I see it. They normally do it during the irrigation season. So what you get out of this is that actually our water tables are set by the lake level, really. As the lake level goes down, the amount of water table that we're able to maintain in Big Valley here goes down also. So what's happening then is going to be earlier reduction in the water table. I think myself it's going to be minimal, but what it does mean is that Yolo County needs to be brought into the discussion here. I don't know if they're pumping out of the Clear Lake tributary or out of the Indian Valley Reservoir tributary, but I think we should ask them, could you please take that out of the Indian Valley Reservoir because you're lowering the water table here. So if the farmers are lowering the water table, and it's affecting creek flow, they are also doing it. We're all in this together, all of us that pump out of this stream flow here. We've got a couple of cities that pump a lot out of the creeks. Farmers do. We're pumping out of the groundwater primarily. And the other thing that you get out of this is actually, if you look at the ground here, this is higher than right here. So you can imagine this is Kelsey Creek here, and Kelsey Creek flows, and it doesn't really get water over here into the water table and gets to reach a certain level, and then it spills back over and it goes down into that. And the reason is there's a lot of sediment that packs up where the creek flow, and it has to get up above that sediment before it goes over the top into the gravel and can go down into the water situation. So I would read this. It's very enlightening. If this is true, what they say, we're not affecting stream flow really by pumping out of 5% of the actual water we use out of Kelsey Creek. We're not affecting
Thank you.
stream flow during Hitch season.
Thank you.
And just to add, the dam is releasing 7.63 cubic feet per second as of this morning. That is not a lot of water at all being released through the dam, so it must be coming from another source.
Hi, my name is Joanne Saccato. I'm wearing a different hat than I was here earlier today. I am the secretary of the Sierra Club Lake Group, which is our local Sierra Club group here. And I'm just speaking formally representing the Lake Group with this statement. We urge the board to approve the proclamation recognizing the extreme peril to Hitch. The Hitch is not just another fish, but it's a culturally significant native species whose disappearance would be a profound tragedy and a shame upon this generation of Lake County residents. The Sierra Club will support any efforts to address the factors affecting the Hitch and look forward to an intensive and comprehensive dialogue throughout our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Afternoon. My name is Joseph Weber. I'm a Big Valley Tribal member, Housing Committee Chairman, and cultural practitioner. My family is the Hopper Clan. I ask that we look past the politics and and see what it's really about. It's not about crops, it's not about water rights, it's about the hitch. Everything else can be decided later date. The fact that the fish is going to be gone forever is important. Crops can be replanted, money can be made or reimbursed, but the hitch will go away forever, like the splittail, which was a species that went extinct in California and was here in Clear Lake. It's not natives versus farmers. We can be united in this fight. Neighbors and farmers have a lot in common. We both have families we care for. We both have families that we want to eat and thrive. We both don't want the hitch to go extinct. We need not to fear the energy proclamation. This is just a safety precaution to protect the hitch. I'm sure if the farmers that border these creeks of interest would be able to receive financial aid from one of the 7 tribes, if not the state agencies, to deal with the loss due to helping out the hitch if their insurance can't cover it. I want the Board of Supervisors to think about this vote. Fish and Game and California Board of Water both said that there is an issue and it needs to happen fast. So we can't say in good conscience that the fish, the hitch, don't have an issue here. The Lakeport won't, we have to look at this emergency proclamation seriously. It's not a good look for the community or board when we sit there and say that there's no issue. I think we need to take off the blinders. I will explain what I mean. It's a reference of how some people see natives and our traditions. Please bear with me while I make this comparison I ran across in an article. When we talk about African Americans, we are aware of the slavery, police brutality, and Black Lives Matter. When we talk about Judaism, we acknowledge genocide, concentration camps, and exiles. But when we talk about natives, the first thing we think of is casinos, alcoholism, laziness, uneducation, and broken down cars. When we need to be thinking of our lost children, our language, our government that hired people to hunt us down. Clear Lake natives have suffered enough. Don't let the hitch go extinct on your watch, please. Be on the right side of history, because our children are watching, and we have less than 2 years. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
How are you today? My name is Robert Gary. I'm the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and the Director of Cultural Resources for Hub Emmental, Pomo of Upper Lake. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. So I just wanted to start off saying that, we need action. This time of back and forth has taken long enough to where we're in the situation that we're in today. I know what it feels like to be a native species and not be a part of the plan. I know what that feels like. And so, I'm still here today, and I'm integrating to be a part of the plan. So is the hitch. And so we need to understand that this proclamation, and we're talking about solutions. We're talking about not having funding and all of this. Through this proclamation, it'll show that actually county cares. It'll open up funding from different agencies to be able to do what we need to do. We heard from somebody earlier from Upper Lake, a landowner. Same situation a lot of the ag, people are a part of. Still had concerns as far as for regulation. In this proclamation, it talks about that regulation. So I don't see where the problem is of making sure that we as a county, whether it's tribal or non-tribal, that we're working together to be able to create something to show the state and the federal agencies that we care. I looked at this presentation earlier today, and it showed me all of these other species that are also declining. The difference from the 2 species that are native is that they're only here. If the largemouth bass goes low in numbers and we want to refeed our lake with that, guess what? We can go somewhere else where they got big numbers. You can't do that with the hitch. You can't do that with the tule perch. Those are things that are native to here. So really, we have to be able to protect those resources that are within our own territory that we can't get anywhere else. And I think today is action. You know, all the bickering and fighting, and we're talking about solutions about like, how are we going to do this? How can we do this together? And I heard about, we're going to create, let's create another committee. And we'll have one tribal representative on that committee. Well, there's 7 tribal nations that are here within Lake County. All different governments, all sovereign nations, different protocols and different processes. Why wouldn't we want each one of those tribes at the table along with every other agency that's there? Inclusion and transparency. I work for Habemetal. My mother's from Big Valley, and I'm from Alem. A lot of different places, different protocols, different processes, different things to follow, different creation stories, different stories about my connection to here. And so that's the way that we have to look at things, especially dealing with the indigenous communities. So I just ask, from this Board of Supervisors to take into consideration that we need action. We can't sit on our hands anymore. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Sherry Treppa. I'm the chairwoman of Habemetal Poma of Upper Lake. Want to take the time to thank you for your diligence and your efforts on behalf of the Hitch. I'm really proud that you're new, but Supervisor Green, but appreciate your commitment here to something that's of vital importance. Unfortunately, I'm disappointed, I guess, because I see where the vote is headed. I would have expected by now, over the course of the last few weeks, indeed several months, I'm sure, that there could have been some collaboration to come to a place where this proclamation could get passed. In our day-to-day work, we often have differences, but we come together to take action that will ultimately, serve what the purpose is. And in this case, obviously, we are trying to protect an endangered species. And we all know that's going to happen. It's just, 12 months down the road. And the time is now to take action or the situation's going to be dire. Unfortunately, as leaders, we often are facing difficult choices. But the one thing we can't do is kick the can down the road, because our generations are going to feel the impact. And this is a moment where we need strong leaders at this board. And sometimes, it's hard actions, hard decisions, but you have to make them. And so on behalf of my tribe, I urge you today to pass this proclamation. I expect that the language proffered by Anita in item 7 hopefully will be adopted, but I urge you to finish and get this in a final position to be able to pass it. Thank you. And again, I urge you to support this proclamation.
Thank you. And this is the first opportunity that we've had to talk and collaborate, because we can't. We have not, we have to respect the laws and the Brown Act. And so this is it. We haven't had a chance to discuss it. So this is the work that we're doing right now today.
Howdy, Jonathan Walters, Big Valley grape grower. I'll just start here. This conservation strategy is a great thing that we need to be looking at. So what I'm going to suggest is that the emergency proclamation, as the last speaker just said, this can's been kicked down the road long enough. I'm for adopting the emergency proclamation. But I don't think any of the requests should be proposed or accepted until this gets finalized and everybody on this board understands this. This covers nearly every one of those requests that are on that. As Bruno said, there's a lot of unknown consequences with these requests, and I think this will cover a lot of the stuff. And not to mention, this is written by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, which is also the group that's going to be looking at the endangerment of the hitch in a couple years. So it makes sense that that same party is going to be we'll be working with them going through the next couple of years, that you're giving power to them, let them do the research, and maybe impossibly that our decision will come down sooner rather than later. So just to recap, I support the approval of the emergency proclamation with none of the requests that were listed until this is finalized and the board fully understands what's on this packet right here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Michael Wegner, citizen of Lake County. I think that everybody really sounds like they're on the same page as far as we have to do something. I think relying on the bigger government, I think that there's good reason to be hesitant to that and those doors that you open. It could definitely be a Pandora's box as far as how that affects everybody. Looking at the locals and all the people that are here, I think that there's not this big separation between everybody. Like we really can do things together. And I know even people that would be agricultural in status, they're more than willing to work with or even contribute money, land, and space. So I think that the two parties have the most power to make a change or make a difference are already sitting in this room. It's not necessarily in Sacramento where it has to be done. I know John and I had spoken about doing a hatchery there on your property, right, John? And so he had
Michael, speak to us, please.
So I guess what I'm getting at is the agricultural community and the cultural community could be working together to produce these hatcheries and make these changes that doesn't necessarily need the influence from the bigger or greater government. Ultimately, I think everybody really is on the same page. We could argue about what the problem is, but we could all find a solution regardless of what the problems are. And so with that, I hope that we can just move forward in finding a solution. I think the proclamation is a good idea. I think there's a good point to being careful about what you include in that proclamation. But the parties that can make the biggest difference are already sitting in this room. And how do we get everybody to the same table is really the question.
Anyone else in the chambers?
Good afternoon. My name is Justin Fredrickson. I'm a water and environmental policy analyst from the California Farm Bureau, and I don't mean to parachute in on your local issues here, but it's also, an issue that we see of statewide significance. It's kind of paralleled in various places around the state, and so some of the things that have been proposed can look, fairly existential if they went down a certain way, and so we get a little concerned when we start to see things that could shut down water use that's essential to, production of certain crops. I wanted to run through a few points. The good news is that everybody's agreeing that there's a problem, there's a crisis, and something needs to happen. The reality, though, is that there are lots of questions, and we don't have a lot of answers. And there's also been a fair amount of inertia. There have been lots of things talked about over the years, and it looks like a lot of things have not happened that should have happened before. Now we're in this crisis, trying to figure out, where to go from here. Facts are stubborn, but we first need to know what those facts are, and we can't fix problems if we don't understand what the nature of those problems. So I think everyone is understanding that there's a need to step things up, but it was also acknowledged by the gentleman who presented earlier, there's no silver bullet. These are complex issues, and so there's a lot to work through here. We have a letter that we submitted earlier that wasn't to inundate you in paper. It was to try and come forward with a serious proposal from agriculture and show our willingness to, the willingness of the local agriculturists here to work with you and to commit to certain voluntary actions. And there's a detailed list in there that was mentioned of things that should get us some answers to some of those questions that we all need answers to. Those voluntary commitments are focused mostly on water. So there's a water use piece to it, both surface and groundwater. There's a piece that relates to creeks and lakes and aquifers and what's going on there. And there's a piece that relates to the fish and where the fish are in relation to what's going on with water use. Hopefully, based on all of that, we can get a better understanding of that water piece and know better what to do there. In terms of the proclamation, they're different. It's been discussed, is it all the asks? Is it none of the asks? Is it certain asks left out or tweaked? That's for you all to decide. I think you've heard a number of opinions expressed here, all over the board, really. Near term, this year, something needs to happen. There's some good ideas out there, implementable things like the Highland Springs releases. That sounds like it could make a big difference. The rains that we're seeing right now are also going to help us this year. In the meantime, we need to get better data and understand better, what we need to do, the real nature of the problem and the real nature of the solutions that can go with that problem. Okay, it sounds like I'm out of time, but I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Sarah Ryan, Environmental Director with the Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians. I just wanted to address a few of the comments that were made by the board and also some of the participants today, just to answer some questions. So there are coordinated efforts on the creeks this season, starting right away in terms of doing, not only looking for frost protection and other agricultural water use, but also to look for barriers, to look for potential stranding of the creeks. We're doing flow monitoring in certain locations, and this is data that we are sharing, multiple tribes are sharing with the agencies, and that is perhaps stuff that could also be shared locally. The October meeting of the Fish and Game Commission was, the Clear Lake Hitch were on the agenda. I don't know why the county or agricultural community didn't participate in that, but it was on the agenda and duly noticed, so it was just the tribes that attended that, I guess.
But were there invitations that went out to anyone?
They don't invite anybody, they just put it on the agenda. So we traveled all that way and brought elders with us and everything to be able to, to discuss it, but it was on the agenda. The point about clearly, or about the county participating, there were asks for the county, there have been some asks during the summit for manuals and things like how are they operating the dams, levees, and detention structures on the creeks, and and that information has not been received yet. So if the county is going to be participating in any sort of task force, they really need to be stepping up to par like what everybody else is doing. In terms of just information sharing, one of the reasons why I think number 6 ask is in there is because the water boards is already asking that information from the local agricultural community, and what I'm hearing even from the agricultural community at the last meeting before the Board of Supervisors is people were turning in statement of diversion and use reports for surface water use that was misstating the amount of water that they were using because they're afraid they were going to lose their water rights. So we already have a problem with the data that's out there, and so I'm really happy to hear from the previous speaker that there are some voluntary measures that they're planning on doing. I haven't seen that list, but looking forward to seeing that. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to mention. I guess that is it. Just wanted to, the conservation strategy. The conservation strategy has been worked on by, I just want to point out the, persistence and long-term commitment that Peter Windrum has had to work on that. And he certainly got a lot of good things in there for the agricultural community. But we've not been able to get anything about water use and water restrictions. So the fact that they're saying it's a good plan, we don't think it's a good plan as long as that's not allowed to be in there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Pat Scully. I would encourage that you guys add into your proclamation something that states that ag should be at the table, ag and all stakeholders for that matter, and on all these committees, at these meetings. I'll point out the Hitch Summit that was held in December. Ag was not invited to that. That was kind of a secret meeting as far as we were concerned. A lot of misinformation was put out at that meeting, and immediately we had the Fish and Game Commission writing letters with asks, Fish and Wildlife writing letters with asks or demands that we stop groundwater pumping, frost protection, well moratoriums. That was all based off of stuff that they had no knowledge of. It was kind of at the whim of what they heard at that meeting. For that reason, we would urge you to also remove number 6. We've already seen the letters from the Fish and Game Commission, Fish and Wildlife. I mean, that's what we're asking for. We're asking the state to come in and solve our problem for us, and we don't have a lot of confidence that that can get done. I think you see in this room, there's a lot of people. We all want to solve this problem, but we need to solve it together. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris McLeod, Big Valley Rancheria Tribal Treasurer. I just want to concur, it wasn't a secret meeting. It was a meeting of government to governments. None of those state agencies would supply or discuss or even bring to the table any false information. They brought their own data, they brought their own experts. We all discussed and collaborated, just to be clear. My statement to you today is, this emergency proclamation here today is not designed to hurt or cause harm to anyone. It is to save a species. To me, a member of my extended family. Do you want to be the 1 or 2 people on this panel here today that says no to this species and is lost forever because of you? This proclamation will show the state that you, the county, agree with what they're saying. This fish is in danger of extinction. The Fish and Game Commission has written a letter to request this fish to be added to the federal listing. If you don't participate willingly, the state is going to mandate changes. You may or may not agree with them. If they see your participation, they will be more inclined to offer support for this change to you, to your constituents, to the ag community, to the life-saving measures that are needed for this hitch to survive here. This change is coming. We sat together yesterday with Governor Gavin Newsom and his cabinet. And the Clear Lake hitch was mentioned several times throughout the day with them, as you know, sir. And they're in support of this. Again, they're going to make changes. They've already said what they want to happen. They're listed there in front of you. They're on that list. Those aren't asks that we came up with ourselves as tribal people that have no knowledge or experience or education. This came from them. These are what their asks were. They knew that these were things that weren't outside of the box that could be implemented. These are things that have happened around the world through different agencies to assist with endangered species. The opportunity for financial support will likely come to the willing parties. If you give pushback and you don't show your support, they're not going to grant you any grant money. If they see that you don't even care enough today to proclaim this as an emergency, because we are in an emergency, this fish is dying, you will be responsible for it not living any longer. You will be responsible for that if you do not vote for this today. We are in a drought, and everyone should have to conserve their uses. We don't feel like that's happening. On behalf of Big Valley Rancheria Band of Pomo Indians, I urge you from my whole heart to please pass this proclamation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Daniela Santana. I'm the environmental director at Habamental Pomo of Upper Lake. And I just wanted to say, I watched your guys' governance meeting last week, and you guys talked about these silos within the county. I think you really need to internally look at that, because it's not only Water Resources' job for this. Water Resources is bearing the burden of a lot of departments on different programs. Low-impact development, that hasn't been passed. That's a land management issue. Stormwater management, that's a big, heavy push for specifically water resources, but it should be a lot more other departments. Everything that's happening in the creeks, that's not only water resources. So I urge you guys to look within the board and then within staff too, and bring them together first before you look out to everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in the chambers? One more thing? Yeah. Okay.
Just going to be really brief here. I'm sure you remember my name from 10 minutes ago. In case that's an issue, Rebecca Harper, Lake County Farm Bureau. You know, I just kind of want to conclude that the agricultural stakeholders are not in opposition of an emergency proclamation and do not deny that this is a state of emergency. Simply, we would support an emergency proclamation so long as request number 6 is eliminated. And not because we see water use as not being an issue or a part of the equation, but because we're already working with those agencies to develop collaborative solutions without the threat of an immediate or emergency regulation that has the potential, to cause an economic collapse of an $80 million industry and the individuals that work in that industry. So at this point, I just feel that's detrimental to the work that our organizations and state agencies are doing collaboratively. And that the threat of a regulation is just really unnecessary and irresponsible in this case. But to summarize, we do support an emergency proclamation that does not contain request number 6. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
Thanks, Sarah Ryan, Environmental Director, Big Valley Band of Poma Indians. I did want to add to the statement I made earlier, something that I think is really important, and it really is germane to the topic. Both the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and CDFW have identified that the loss of spawning habitat due to past watershed modifications that have blocked access to or altered the flow regime of tributary streams are one of the primary causes of the Clear Lake Hitch decline. So it's identified in both the federal and the state science that it's the spawning habitat. And the spawning habitat means not only, yes, we've got the dredging issues that have been brought up, but it's also the fact that they can't finish their spawning run. So to pull out number 6 and to say, oh, it's really not a water issue, we're going to, we want to keep it local control, then the county has the ability to permit and to affect the permitting of groundwater wells and other water diversions that are happening off of the creeks. So if you want to keep it local, then have that be the ask of your agricultural and other community that to approve land use permits and water withdrawals. So that's something you can do if you want to take that out and handle it locally. But we do think it needs to happen, and the science says that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Janine Pfeiffer, ethnoecologist. It's 2030, and we're looking back at Lake County and the decision that was made in February 2023. And that decision, including the proclamation that was passed by the Board of Supervisors, set the stage for Lake County becoming known as a county that took a crisis and turned it into an opportunity, and began the process to change the reputation of Lake County and the reputation of Clear Lake. I just came back from Reno, where I got married. Actually, South Lake Tahoe. It was pretty cool. And every person we were talking to about our wedding, they said, so where are you from? We said, Lake County, blank stares. Clear Lake. Oh yeah, I know that lake. It's really not clear, is it? It's really messed up, huh? And we said, yeah, but we're part of these groups that are working to clean it up, to do water monitoring, to save the Hitch. So it's 2050, we're looking back, and this is when the tide turned.
and we did the right thing, and we turned crisis into opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else in the chambers? Okay, Zoom room?
We'll start, do you want to start with CDFW or the public?
We can start with CDFW.
Okay, we have Sarah Moselman.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to actually jump in. It's been a minute now, but there was 2 different times during this meeting that our data from 2020 were referenced as evidence that this decline might just be partly temporary or might just be a blip. And so I just wanted to put it on the record, add a little clarity on what we actually said and what we actually found in 2020. And it does basically fit right in there with what USGS found. Although I will also say our data and USGS data are not directly comparable because those are very different studies with very different methodologies. But just real quick, the report says, in 2020, a below-average total rainfall during the wet season resulted in low stream flows and low turbidity, which made viewing any hitch in the creeks easier. Even though the number of hitch seen in 2020 increased from any previous year's survey, all hitch were seen once at one site. Some of the tributary sites did not have water in them during the survey period, which was, by the way, very early. This was in before COVID shut us down, so it's early March. Preventing any opportunity for hitch upstream migration because streams are already dry. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to cancel the following 3 weeks of surveys. So we don't know what we would have seen, later in that season, but water conditions were already deteriorating at that time during mid-March. So we don't feel at all confident that this was an excellent year for hitch. It was just basically one survey point in Kelsey Creek during one survey where we saw large numbers of fish. I just wanted to make sure that that was on the record and that nobody was unclear about those data. Thank you.
Next is Haji Wharf.
Good afternoon, once again, board members. My name is Haji Wharf from Upper Lake. I urge you to support the emergency proclamation for the Hitch, though it's clear 2 of you are going to side with the ag interests and vote no. It's clear to me. Watered down as it was, predictably, to satiate the voracious appetite of ag's thirst, this is the most benign action you could take on behalf of the Hitch. If you cannot show this modicum of support, then I consider this inaction as a dereliction of duty. You were elected to represent the interests of all in Lake County, not just the economic stakeholders. Just because the Hitch has no voice should not mean it should be silenced forever. Supervisor Sabatier, you are using semantics about the parameters under which to declare an emergency as a means of backing out of giving the proclamation your support. I hear excuse after excuse, each a brick in the wall you're building against it. This will be the first species in 50 years of California history to go extinct. Perhaps that's why you can't find a previous emergency proclamation regarding the extinction of a species. This has been a staged act of cowardice, showing no teeth and gumming the proclamation to death. Your inability to move forward is because of barriers you've deliberately put in place. The Hitch does not have the time to accommodate your finger and tongue twiddling, your hems and haws. Your gutless performance has been embarrassing. I sincerely hope those who vote against this mildest of measures are held to account by their constituents. I hope the state bypasses your fecklessness and expedites direct action, because the Hitch has no time left for this lethargic behavior by this board. By withholding action, you have relinquished the right for this county to be self-determinant. This, too, is a failure of this board. Back on its heels instead of being proactive with its foot forward. And I appeal to the public to consider that it's time to find new leadership. Thank you for your time.
Next.
Phone 9344, yeah.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Kelly Anderson. My husband and I are recent property owners in Lake County. We have 3 small rental cottages, which we rent full-time to working individuals, members of our community. We have invested countless hours and tens of thousands of dollars in creating safe, clean, affordable housing for working members. We believe that the protection of the Clear Lake Hitch is a priority situation, and the facts are clear. The facts are clear that habitat loss due to surface water and groundwater extraction, this drying of the creek during critical spawning times, is responsible largely for the loss of this fish species. Bruno mentioned telling our story, and as new members of the community, our family tries to tell the stories about the incredible natural resource that the lake is. But we can't tell our story if we don't take strong, immediate action to protect the species. You have U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Department of Fish and Wildlife, tribal members, Sierra Club, your own water agencies advising you that the protection of the surface water resources must happen now. I'd like to make one suggestion for changes in the language of the declaration. I believe the language where feasible should be replaced with where necessary, because feasibility is so vague, and we really need to curtail frost and irrigation pumping during the times that the fish needs the habitat. It's clear that the cultural and environmental health of the lake is the primary foundation of the economy. If we have the press release saying we've lost this fish due to habitat loss, what does it say to potential visitors for natural beauty, for hiking, for enjoying the recreational resources? Agriculture, I've worked for 30 years of my life in production agriculture, and we need to step up and adopt quickly alternate sources of frost protection. They are available, and it's important. I support agriculture, and agriculture is groundwater and surface water dependent. Agriculture is dependent on the health of our natural resources. So I expect the full board's support to adopt this resolution tonight, and I am only a 5-year member of your community, but I have shifted my wine consumption personally. I no longer buy Napa County wine because it is so damaging to our environment, and I'd like to continue as a consumer to purchase and promote Lake County agriculture. We need to take bold steps. Don't backpedal. Don't produce false
Thank you.
data.
Your 3 minutes is up.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Next is call-in user 2.
Call-in user 2, can you state your name for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Still trying to figure out how to use this thing. Angela Amaral, I wanted to thank you guys again for taking this on and listening to everybody. There seems to be some concern over number 6 and number 7, which leads back to going back to the Middle Creek Restoration Project, which should serve as a reminder of how hard it can be to work with outside government agencies sometimes. Supervisor Green mentioned in the beginning that this proclamation could pass without any of the asks. And maybe that's the way to go at this point. With so much, it seems to be creating more tension than it is helping. But we all agree that the Hitch need to be protected, that a proclamation needs to be done, but maybe it just needs to be done right now without the ask. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Lori Montserrat.
Hi, Lori Montserrat, Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. Thank you very much for your time. In addition to urging you to support the declaration protecting the Hitch, I'd like you to know that I didn't receive an invitation to the Hitch Symposium nor to this Board of Supervisors meeting, but I managed to attend because I'm interested. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Meg Townsend.
Hello, this is Meg Townsend, Senior Attorney, Freshwater Attorney with the Center for Biological Diversity. I want to echo the support for adopting an emergency proclamation for the Clear Lake Hitch. And I also want to clarify some things about what Fred Farrer said about his sampling data, which takes place in June. That sampling reflects the prior year's spawning success and whether or not that spawning effort was in fact successful. So the data that shows in 2021 that the population declined by 40% from the already 75% decline shown in 2019 would reflect any perceived spawning or, observed spawning that happened in 2020. So that data is pretty clear. And, there was a lot of hand waving about uncertainty with this. And I will say and emphasize that if you wait for perfect information, it will mean extinction of the Clear Lake Hitch. And so, it's true there's not just one threat to the Hitch. There are many overlapping threats. You mentioned climate change, which is significant, as is pollution in the lake, and habitat destruction, predation, and competition. But the biggest threat to the Hitch is the loss of stream spawning habitat and wetland rearing habitat. That is something that the county can affect by approving land use permits and water withdrawals or not approving them. And I'll also make a comment that voluntary measures are just that. They're voluntary and not enforceable. And although they're definitely appreciated, another suggestion could be for item number 6. That language is pretty soft. I mean, I'm an attorney. I'm looking at it. It says issuing information orders or adopting emergency regulations. It's not mandating one specific result. And, the regulated community could come to the table and help to craft the regulations that they're voluntarily agreeing to. And that could be part of that process. So I urge the board to adopt the emergency proclamation, including numbers 6 and 7. Thank you.
Next is Fred Briones.
Hello. Hi. Yes, I would like to just first and foremost just say that, this is a disaster. It's such a disaster to our lake. And we see now what's happening. We're losing our culture. We're losing just our future. And we can't allow that to happen. And I really wish somewhere in that proclamation, it would include this wine industry in restitution because of the disaster to human life, to animals, to our community, to our county. At one time, it was called Clear Lake, may I mind you. Now it's, the Private Liquor Barrel Reserve. And the board members, the supervisors, I'm going to point some fingers and just say, the tribes believe in climate change, but convince these grape growers of climate change. What a difficult task. And I want to just say, I own a business. I own property in District 5. And I want to say, Jessica, as the supervisor, it really shows the way you're going to vote. We all see it. And when I read about it, what your background is, the wine industry, making poison, we see. We all know. Yes, yes, yes. Look at each other really closely because those are the 2 votes right there that I want to ask you to step down from your positions because going forward, this is not going to be easy to deal with the future, this disaster of our lake. because of the psychology, the way you view our lake as a private liquor barrel reserve. That is so unfair that your business now is being weighed against our county. We own a business around that lake, a hotel, motel. And the future of that business is so uncertain because of agriculture and pumping down the water. To say that the stream water is not connected to the aquifer, wow, that's a lot of convincing right there. Whole bunch of data, which tries to prove over how many hundreds of years of theory incorrect. In my eyes, that is swindling water into wine. It's so obvious. Don't do that to us, please. Step down, Jessica. I own property in District 5 in Riviera. I want a secure lake for my future, from our family, for 10,000 more years. This is Oleomi, and we want to always remember that. So please, Jessica, no more water into wine. Step
Your
down.
time is up. Thank you.
Next, we have CDFW Felipe LaLuz.
Yeah, Felipe LaLuz, CDFW again. Just to provide some clarity, the December 8th Clear Lake Emergency Summit was a government-to-government meeting. It was not a public meeting. And again, just to put in another plug, join the State Water Resources Control Board mailing list. They are doing a lot of outreach. So I hear a lot wanting to come to the table. That's the venue to do it in. Thank you.
Thank you.
And those are all the hands that we have on Zoom.
Okay. Do we have another comment from the board chambers? While she's making her way up here, I don't work in the wine industry. I've never owned a vineyard. I don't know where that came from. There was a little time I poured wine in a tasting room. That might be it, but it's never been something that I've done professionally.
Hi, I'm Tony Scully. My family are pear growers and shippers. First of all, I want to apologize, and I'm sorry for the personal attacks that almost all of you have received in this process. I know that you're all trying to do your job and represent the whole county, and it's not easy. There's one whereas in this proclamation that stabs me in the heart, kind of, and it's the one that says, many Lake County residents and interested parties, including agricultural and sport fishing and yada, 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 are not fully informed about the critical importance of this 2023 spawning season. I wish you would take that part out, Michael. Take agriculture out of that word, because we are fully informed. And we have put out things that we'd like to do to help to collect data. Every government report says we need more data, every single one. And we stand ready, the ag community, to help collect that. And I'm sorry that there's been some remarks about how our data is not honest either. We all want to protect the Hitch. We respect the tribes. We respect your traditions and the desire and the necessity. It's part of our quality of life here to preserve that. And I don't need to tell you how much the agricultural segment contributes to our quality of life here too. You know that. So we'd like to partner with the tribes, and we need some help on that. The first problem for this is that for us, we haven't been included in these meetings, summits, agency meetings, organizational meetings. We haven't been at the table for any of them. We haven't even known about a lot of them. The tribes know about all of them, and they get notices because they're sovereign nations. We're not. We're not government agencies. We're just people, and we don't know these things are going on. And, we want to be at the table. We don't want to be on the menu. We want to work together. Looking at number 6, Michael, Scott De Leon said he hates to give up our local control of this. If you want something fast to happen, I hope you don't depend on the state to do it. The ag community has set out a list of things that we want to help right now in collecting data, ideas on what can be done, like stream release, really getting data on frost protection and the stream beds, how to keep water in the stream beds. We can do it. We have the ability in this county to do it, and we can do it this year if we all work together. You know how the state works. They have hearings and they have meetings and they have public input things. They decide ahead of time what they're going to do. You know this. And then they send out their groups to have public meetings, and then they check off that they had them. We can help. We want to help. We need help from the supervisors. There's a disconnect between us, the tribes, and everything we need to do. And we need to do it together. And we support this proclamation without the number 6, even with nice wording. But this thing that Jonathan put in your face before, that's due to come out next month by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, addresses all these asks in detail in a good way for everybody on things that we can all do. So this proclamation really could be passed without any of these asks and have our emergency proclamation. Just please take out the part that says agriculture isn't fully informed on the critical importance, because we are informed of it. We do want to help. We do want to be of the team. You mentioned, EJ, the task force, the Blue Ribbon Committee.
Yes.
And we haven't been in any of those meetings either. The Blue Ribbon Committee is mostly tribal people. And again, they all know about what's going on. But we need to have ag there. We need to be able to stand up and say, yes, we're going to count. We're going to turn in our hours on what we do. We support raising the...
Tony, I forgot to set my timer, but I did notice it's been...
Oh, you think I'm over?
I think we're about there, yeah. Sorry, I apologize. I thought...
That's okay. You get my point.
Thank you.
We want to help, and
I'll
we
send
want
you
to be
the
included.
dates for the next meeting, so
Okay.
because I have your email. So
Thank you.
Okay, are we through public input? Any last requests? Okay, one more.
Michael Wegner, just for a little bit of clarity so everybody's totally clear. Last time I saw this many people in here was about over a year ago, and somebody had proposed a moratorium on all new agricultural permits. And that's actually Bruno. So he's not on either side. We can't figure out whose side he is actually on.
Thanks, Michael. That was really helpful. I try to do what's right, and I bring up what I think is right. It's not anything personal.
Okay, we've heard from a lot of people. I'll close public input and bring it back to the board. Michael, I'm sorry, Supervisor Green?
Michael's fine. So two things on the draft proc and the two issues of concern, the whereas statement referenced in the prior comment, and then bullet item number 6 in the asks. And I did not want to drive a stake through anyone's heart, and I didn't want to have everyone pull out their thesaurus. What I was attempting to state in that particular clause was that none of us are fully informed. I mean, to the sense that we can claim we know exactly what's going on. I think most of the statements I've heard from the agricultural community saying we weren't at this or that meeting kind of proves the point that they have not been fully informed, at least up to this point, any more than the county has been fully informed up to this point. it is what it is. These long-term efforts have been ongoing. Many of them have involved public agencies, including the Blue Ribbon Commission. I attended my first meeting ever a week or so ago. And I was not fully informed of this process. When I went to the emergency summit at Big Valley Rancheria, I left with many more questions than I had answers. I was informed better thanks to that summit. It was hugely important. But I acknowledge the fact that not everyone was there. I acknowledge the fact that my own misunderstanding of the nature of that meeting as an intergovernmental consultation versus a public meeting. I'm all like Brown Act, and they're saying no, Bagley-Keene Act, and it's just like, it's a mess. So let me confess first, I'm not fully informed. I'm up here like throwing a proclamation around like I know what's going on, and it basically says, no, we don't. That's part of the state of emergency, is the fact that none of us are fully informed. And if you talk to these other people kind of correcting their data sets and clarifying, I think they would be the first to acknowledge they're not fully informed as well. We are learning as we go, data set by data set, meeting by meeting, and there's an arc of time that goes over this. To those who think we should somehow wrest control back because we don't know what the state agencies do or how long they would take to do it, fair observation, equally fair observation that there are people in this room who question the pace of work that has occurred in past years by this county, that there aren't adequate staff resources to fire everything up and get in the driver's seat. So even if we had the willingness to be front and center on this, and we told all the state and federal agencies, hold our beer, we got this, I don't think that's accurate in any way. I don't think the particular history of the county, and not to diss our fine county people, but there are people who distrust the county and our lack of actions in prior years and the lack of actions of prior boards. It is what it is. So I don't want to give offense in that particular whereas, but it was written that way for a reason. I think we're all learning as we're going. To the bullet item number 6, that is the other focus of concern. I am thankful that Anita drafted some softer language, but as was noted by one of the other speakers, it's pretty soft to begin with. And I think they're already going to do what they're going to do. But as we get through the discussion and we get ready to take some votes, all of this is up for grabs. If somebody wants to take a bullet point or a word out or maybe add some words, this is about the point where I get to just say, let's wrap it up. We have a draft emergency proclamation. We do not have a roadmap of every project coming forward. I know as soon as next week, I'm hoping to bring an item forward on gravel mining and what some of the impacts might be on there. There are any number of topics that have been raised by our partner agencies. Somebody mentioned a well drilling moratorium like happening in Sonoma County. Guess what? Somebody asked us to do that. We're not talking about that today, but I expect we will in future weeks, and in the short term, not in the long term. So I just want to thank people for what we do know. There is willingness in our community to start having these tough discussions. There is willingness in our community to build bridges of understanding. There is an heartfelt desire for people to participate in these processes moving forward. So I want to take that glass half full, because it's not half full, it's brimming over with good intent. But we got to start somewhere. And I think the somewhere where we're at today right now is if we can all agree in this room that a state of emergency exists for the status of the Clear Lake Hitch or Chai, and that this county will acknowledge that by means of this emergency proclamation as a starting point, not the ending point, for the many actions that will follow.
I think that whereas is fine. It implements everybody. It's not specified to a specific group, and there is no specific one group that is entirely knowledgeable on this situation at all, period. So I think that whereas is fine. Michael's pretty funny. Been thinking about that the whole time before this whole conversation was happening. I'm worried about water. That's why I had that conversation with Ag. I sat down with some of the biggest vineyards and got drilled. I forget where we were sitting down, but I know that I was pretty much alone on that seat. But I wanted to hear what they had to say. And to me, saying no more Ag was not Ag is bad, is there's only a limited amount of supply. We do not have unlimited amount of water. And I fear for the future if we keep adding and adding and adding, because there will be a point of no return where once we say yes, we can't say, oops, could we take that back? That was my thinking. And in my thinking today, I am willing to be flexible, but I don't want to oops of inviting the state. Yeah, they could do that anytime they want. But inviting them to say, hey, help us with creating some regulations. I like the softened language a lot better because it really offers a conversation rather than saying provide emergency regulations. Because the state, I just don't trust. They don't see us in what we are. They don't understand the repercussions of their actions. And I think that as a group, as long as we're all sitting at the table together, we have a much better understanding of what our actions can do and what we need. I'd like to go with the changes that Ms. Grant provided. And while I still have concerns for number 7, that doesn't seem to be a topic of interest for the rest of the board, so I'm willing to let that one slide. But I sure hope that we don't end up with something we didn't anticipate. But I do hope that this does create the spotlight that we do need to be able to move forward, because as I stated when we first started the conversation, we got to do something. Doing nothing is not in the options of things to leave this room with. So.
Either of you? Okay. I think there's been a lot of assumptions about what two of us are thinking, because we have questions and we have concerns. And we came into this with a commitment to take action, and I don't see any reason why we wouldn't today. I feel like it's important to have a commitment to collaborate in here. That holds us accountable to all of you and all of the people that are showing up, all of the tribes, all of the agencies, all of the independent people, and everybody that's interested, everyone's that's doing this work. And I feel strongly about that. It's just a promise to ourselves that we're going to maintain our commitment to be collaborative and share and work together. And I think we've heard that there's been not great communication about when and where meetings are happening. And, if there's not an invitation going out, maybe it needs to be posted somewhere. Maybe we need an email list. Maybe we need to do better to make sure that we can all show up for each other and be at those meetings and be part of the conversation. There's a lot going on. I would like to also request that we be made an official member of the task force, so that we're there, so that we have we could be part of that conversation at the county level. I know Water Resources was there, but I think we can do better. And Daniela brought up this great point that it's not just Water Resources. And that is one thing that I've been thinking of. We have so many departments that touch this. And when we think about breaking down our silos and being collaborative, it does start with us. And you're right, Daniela. So thank you for bringing that up. So being collaborative and asking for that space at the task force to participate are the two things that I would like to see. And then I am okay with that language for number 6. So those were my concerns, and I don't know how the rest of you feel about adding those two things. I I wanted to see some kind of working group, and if that's going to be through the Blue Ribbon Committee, that's great. If we want to come back at another time and look at our own Fish and Wildlife Advisory Committee and how we can revamp that and make that work for us and what we need it to do, that's a discussion for another day. But those are my thoughts, and I want to run that by all of you.
I think too that Councilwoman McLeod had stated that they're going to invite people to their group. So I think that's a good start as well. We can look at our advisory committee for Fish and Wildlife on our own at another time. And that's what I was speaking to earlier. And then propose it to Blue Ribbon and see how it goes from there. I know that would have to be a topic of discussion there. But I do want to make sure that we get that discussion going there, like we talked about earlier. So I agree with you.
Okay, so the Blue Ribbon Committee is here.
Yeah.
But what about the ask to be on the task force?
And I believe that's what Councilwoman
Okay,
McLeod was saying.
but should we put that in here, or is that just, no, we're good? May I comment? Yeah, come up here to the microphone, please. If we're spelling things out, I just want to know where the line is.
Chris McLeod, Big Valley Tribal Treasurer. I just want to note that the government-to-government consultation includes 2 of your supervisors. So they are part of a government. They were invited. They will always be invited, Mr. Crandall and Mr. Simon. So there's 2 of your board members that are included into that task force.
Which aspect?
On the task force?
Yeah.
You guys are invited to attend those meetings.
You mean as supervisors?
No. It's a dual facet, right?
I'm not on the council for Robinson.
But you could be a member, because you're a member of the government.
Oh, okay, I see.
Right?
Yeah, but she's asking for a county seat,
Well, I don't see where inviting to tribal members of a government could easily be asked. But like it was mentioned, there is water board, which isn't part of a government. It's just it's an agency, a county agency. Also, who were at the summit. So there was other county officials at that summit. So it wasn't just the agencies and the tribes.
So are they invited members as guests, or are they members of the task force? Because
well, the task force doesn't specifically have like voting members or non-voting members, if that's what you're asking. So if you're asking for like a voting seat, there are no voting seats on our task force. We're a collaboration of minds.
Can I
Sure.
offer? I think that we can have another conversation on how best to ensure that we are collaborating and communicating in the best of ways, because this may not be the only or potentially the best option. I know that Supervisor Crandall brought up the Blue Ribbon Committee, and there may be other options that I'm not aware of. So I think settling that out, inviting Water Resources, inviting everyone else who has ideas, who are part of a council dealing with the Hitch, I think that's where we continue the conversation, and then we can write a letter with a request that we be a part of that group to make sure that we do communicate and collaborate in the best of ways and not say, oops, I didn't know about that.
I didn't mean to implement that it was only for council members, because you have some of your employees that do attend our task force meetings that aren't on council. But that was part of the collaboration of the government to government. It was allowing your employees to speak on behalf of your experts. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, like our EPA department
Correct.
attended. Yeah.
Correct, sir. I'm sorry about that. It wasn't a council to council, meaning government to government, meaning tribal government with the state government. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And inviting you to the summit was our idea that you are speaking on behalf of your constituents here today, and inviting you opened it up so that you can be the speaker and the listener for what's happening. So I don't want it to seem like we didn't include you guys at all, because we did. We did include you guys. Your county workers were there, your supervisor was there, and so I just don't want that to be a misleading statement. You were invited.
Well, for us, when we delegate a board member to a certain committee, and and then they go on our behalf. But if you invite someone as a guest, they're not necessarily there on behalf of the whole board. So there is a little bit of a difference there that's why we do committee assignments, and we work that all out as a group. So that is something we could work on, maybe a letter or something to figure out how we can be officially part of that.
I just had the Ag Advisory Committee.
Yeah.
You created an Ag Advisory
Yes.
Committee.
Right.
So why would we create something all new?
We're not creating anything new. No, because the task force is already,
But what I'm saying is, wouldn't it be the Ag Advisory Committee that you're on?
Yeah.
You created the Ag Advisory Committee.
yeah.
That would be the committee that we need to come up with who's going to attend, right? To me, or am I getting it wrong?
Well, no.
Any meetings, any conversations, whether it's in the Blue Ribbon Committee or wherever conversations are happening, because there ain't going to be one committee, just as it was said. This is going to invite the Ag Committee, the county, all the tribes, all the U.S., everybody. So wouldn't the Ag Committee,
So I
it's
think-
already formed?
Who's on the Ag Committee?
Well,
we
ironically,
are.
yeah, we're both on, and we haven't been able to talk about this because we're co-sponsoring this. So just to clarify, I hear what you're saying. I don't think today is necessarily do it. I think we should bring back another item and understand that, again, are we not fully under, I was there at the summit. Did I understand what was going on? Clearly not entirely, if only because I wasn't there the whole day. But some of these discussions and these task forces and all that are technical in nature. So having staff consultations at those meetings and staff invitations is important. When policy work is being done and you want a policy representative there, that's a different kind of discussion. So we have both kinds of things going on. We have big, broad meetings where policy is discussed and debated. We have these working groups and these task forces and stuff like that where they're just trying to see if they see the same data and if they can cook some things. So I'm totally open to bringing back a future item. I'd be even happier if I didn't have to bring it because I'm tired. But I think we're going to find ways to collaborate on various platforms with different things. Farm Bureau has been very helpful doing their own collaboration stuff. They don't need our help doing it. So I think it would be helpful to have a central repository so people can follow the bouncing ball of meetings and task forces and stuff. And I think that's something we can bring back to help facilitate that information portal. But I don't know that we need to commit to saying I'm sending a supervisor here or a staff member there, if only because one of the comments we did get at the summit is like our staff was there, but they didn't necessarily feel empowered to talk about much policy-wise. And I think that type of consideration we need to talk about, but maybe not today.
Go ahead.
Two things. One, we have CDFW, Felipe LaLuz. Obviously, we also...
I feel like he's probably going to clear it up for me, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I do want to say, I think the reason we're talking about a committee, at least in the way that I've spoken with Chair Pyska about it, is to ensure that we don't skip those committees and just come to the Board of Supervisors and says, this is what we need to do, without ensuring that we have the input from all of the interested parties that want to review solutions. If we don't have a specific group that we can speak to that can review some of these ideas and solutions, then we might be doing something that doesn't align at all with what else CDFW that is leading that group might be moving forward. So,
Okay, let's hear from CDFW. And I think we have public input.
I just want to could somebody make a chart of all the committees? I was sitting here trying to figure out, make a chart of, okay, so Board of Supervisors up here, then all the committees, who's on them, how they connect. It's like a giant spaghetti of trying to figure out who's doing what's what, who's doing what, who can.
I'm guessing that we're in left field.
Yeah, we got
Yeah, Proclamation here.
Yes, please.
That would be like a Mississippi family tree.
Now she knows how admin feels when she's filling. They're filling.
That was Sharon Zoller, for the record. Okay.
Felipe LaLuz, if you could please speak. Sorry that we cut you off there.
Not a problem, and I can definitely appreciate Sharon Zoller's comments on how confusing this all is. Just with regards to the task force, we are definitely open to having the county participate and encourage that. And it's not a decision-making entity. It's primarily information sharing and coordination. And then again, the State Water Resources Control Board has a mailing list that I encourage all the agricultural communities and all the stakeholders to sign up for that email list on their website. If you Google State Water Resources Control Board Clear Lake Hitch, you can sign up for that. And again, Supervisor Green has my email address. I'm happy to work with you all to help answer some questions and get everybody plugged into the right teams.
Okay. I think just one more thing that maybe it would be helpful if we could host on our website an area with all of these resources and links to the meeting dates. Obviously, it doesn't have to be in our proclamation, but I think that would help with the spaghetti mapping.
Yeah, and just a shout out, Water Resources does have they just relaunched their Clear Lake Hitch page. It probably can be expanded in terms of content, but we certainly have the first efforts made up there.
Okay.
I realize we're not in public comment. I'm just going to ask, can we clarify what the language of number 6 is? My name is Will Weiss. I'm a member of the ag community and a member of the Lake County constituency. That's it.
Okay.
Can we clarify language of number 6? Thank you.
Anita, can you reread that, please?
And that's if the board has consensus
Yes,
to change it.
this was just offered to your board as a means to get consensus. That the State Water Resources Board work directly with county stakeholders to consider the promulgation of regulations to assure the continued viability of the Clear Lake Hitch and other aquatic species upon receipt of watershed-specific, which was a request by Supervisor Green.
Makes sense.
Watershed-specific emergency flow recommendations from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or other fisheries agency.
And I would just like to clarify that I did work to vet that language, and so these are not impractical asks at all. And that's what it says, so thank you.
Supervisor Crandall?
I just want to state why I was okay with number 6 was because I know they're listening, but I really don't think the state's going to do anything. So that's why I was like, let's just get this over with and move forward. So that's just me, but if we have to decide on extra verbiage, I'm fine with that. But that's why I was fine with the asks. I understand in some instances it could seem threatening, but just wanted to clarify why I was okay with it. I just really don't think the state's going to do anything. I think they want us to do this, but I don't think there's nothing they're going to do. But I'm willing to look at the language to adjust it.
Okay. What about you two? How do you feel about that language change?
Yeah, I agreed with it earlier when she said it. And obviously, I think any change, we could obviously bring it back here. We did hear concern from our agricultural community that some letters went out and some other things. So, that's why I agree with it there.
Okay, so we have consensus on number 6.
Yeah, and I just want to signal, I do take seriously the input from the ag community. I know that bullet point is a particular bone of contention and that we don't know what we don't know, but I think the quickest way to get some certainty around those particular actions, because some of the actions that have been coming at us have been overbroad and do need more research and stuff like that. So there's a saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So even if there is healthy skepticism about the intent or the ability of the state water boards to move forward, again, I may have a little more history. I've seen them in action with other controversial subjects before, cannabis cultivation included. And I'm highly confident that one way or another, however their involvement comes, it will be in a spirit of collaboration and partnership and full transparency, and that everyone will have a bite at the apple if and when they do propose to do something.
Supervisor Sabatier?
One thing that I'd like to see in an upcoming agenda related to this is also for water resources to come back to us. We have a lot of projects on their plate, and this declared emergency obviously implicates them in some way, shape, or form to get certain things done. And I think that the board needs to understand maximum capacity and help them find ways, resources, or triaging of what it is that we're asking them to accomplish, rather than adding on top and expecting that there's capacity to do so. I think it requires a conversation.
Supervisor Crandall?
I think that's fine. I think this helps them because it gives them another avenue to utilize, some sort of augmentation or something of that nature to ask for more funding. So that's what I've always believed. So, yeah, yeah.
Okay, anything else?
Just need action.
If there's nothing further from this board? No? Nothing further?
Nope.
I'm not hearing any further. I'm going to move that we approve a proclamation declaring a Clear Lake Hitch emergency as presented today with preferred consensus language, incorporating ideas and feedback from multiple sources as amended, helpfully, by our county council.
I'll second it.
Okay, I have a motion and a
I was
second.
waiting for.
Yeah. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. And thank you, everyone, for being here.
I wasn't going to vote against the proclamation. I mean, that would have been bad.
This has been a little bit of a messy process, but that is democracy, and I appreciate that you bearing with us as we had to work this all out in public. So I appreciate everyone taking the time out of your lives to be here with us to do this work.